government insofar as that 10 billion rand is concerned. So we are really going to focus on SAA today and on all other matters. So I think that for us to save time, Minister, it's 3:05. If I may then hand over to you, and then you will probably see how you will want to present the matters that you have submitted to us. Colleagues, I would request that because we've got our own WhatsApp group, when it comes to questions, please just do indicate to me on that side. It will make it much more easier than trying to do it here on this system. So just indicate to me when that time comes when you want to raise questions. But obviously, for the purposes of any other point of order you may want to raise, you can just do that straight from the platform. So, Minister and your team, you are welcome. And honorable colleagues, welcome to the meeting. So that we can save time, I think let's dive right into it. So, Minister, we'll hand over to you, and then the business rescue practitioners will come in. I think you can dispense with, there were some outstanding matters when we last met, which need clarity and submission, and then we will move on in that fashion. Okay, colleagues, are we all in agreement? Going once, going twice, going thrice, gone. All right, Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to members of SCOPA and all the others that might be in the system as well. And thank you for this opportunity to respond to your letter. So your letter, Chair, requests firstly that we report back to you on the matters that arose in the 18th of February meeting. Secondly, there was, with the concurrence of the business rescue practitioners, an agreement that a business rescue plan would be ready and in a form that we could present to you on the 6th of March. So we'll give you an update on that. You request also an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that it has had on the aviation industry, both globally and in South Africa. In respect of SAA in particular, you make reference to the bailouts that have been provided in the past, and we've sent you a separate pack of information from the department which gives you the history of so-called bailouts or contributions from the fiscus. And you asked the question in the letter, how much does SAA need? Well, bailouts are about the past, and what the new airline might need is still work to be done and is being done. You make reference to the legal opinion that might have been mentioned in the committee at some stage. The chair of the board, Ms. Mgodusu, is also on this call, so she will address that particular matter. Then you request information on SA Express and the developments there. The Deputy Minister is also on the call, and he will cover SA Express together with the acting DG. And you ask about the connection, if you like, between SAA and Airlink, and we've provided you with some information in the pack that we've given. So there is, if you like, comments and a presentation coming from the department and the ministry, but the business rescue practitioners have made their own submission. That's the material that was distributed to you yesterday, and they will take you through that presentation in their own right. By agreement with you, we thought we'll address some of the non-business rescue matters first, and then move on to the business rescue process itself. So as far as the management accounts are concerned, that was requested at the meeting of the 18th. I'm confused between the 18th and the 19th of February. But let's take your date, the 18th. And those management accounts were made available by the business rescue practitioners to us, and we've sent them on to you. Secondly, you make reference to the business rescue plan, which we said, as I said, with the concurrence of the business rescue practitioners, should be able to be tabled with you and discussed with you by the 6th of March. Regrettably, that is not the case. And there's a misinterpretation of the presence of the business rescue practitioners at the meeting of the 18th, deliberate or otherwise, and suggestions by some that they were muzzled, and all we were doing on that occasion was to say to you that their work was incomplete, their investigations that they are required to do in terms of the Companies Act and Chapter 6 of that Act, which refers to the business rescue process, was not completed, and that it's best that we give them an opportunity to finish their work. So these assertions are regrettable and completely unnecessary because the department is absolutely committed to placing something before you in respect of the business rescue plan as soon as it is available. So it brings me, Chair, to the question of the legal opinion that sometime in 2019 might have been, if you like, promised, or there was an undertaking given to the committee. And with your permission, I'd like to ask the chair of the board, acting chair, to respond to that, so with that we can then deal with that matter and proceed to the other matters.
All right, no, that's fine. Minister, I think she can briefly take us through that legal opinion, and I think after she has, we will just note it, because I don't think at this point in time it's materially impacting on what we're doing, but it's important that we get the rationale of the board at the time and that business plan. I think we have clearly made our position known to the board insofar as submission is concerned of the financials, but at the same time we did feel it would be prudent to understand further where the board was coming from. So I'll hand over to the acting chair of the board, and she can summarize the outlook of the opinion. And then over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to clarify the matter of the legal opinion that would have been mentioned at a meeting last year. The legal opinion addressed itself to whether the directors of the board were trading recklessly or not, because that was important to understand in as far as our situation as the board and as the company was concerned. Secondly, if there was an understanding that it addressed why the accounts could not be tabled, then there would have been a misunderstanding or a mistake made. In as far as the rationale around why it took as long as it did for the completion and the readiness of the accounts, may I request Agta, who is the chair of Audited SAA, to address that side, if I may, Chair. Thank you.
That's fine.
Chair, with your permission, the chairperson of the board is quite correct. The legal opinion that we sought was around the risk that the directors carried around reckless trading because of the short-term nature of the funding that was made available to us on the back of sovereign guarantees from the shareholder. So that is the opinion that we had accessed, and it wasn't an opinion on whether we should or should not submit financial statements.
Okay. It's fine. I have seen that legal opinion that you had, and I think the committee, as I've said, has expressed itself on the matter, and when we finalize our report, we will. But I think resolutions have been made insofar as that is concerned in terms of how we take it forward. But I think we've got the benefit now of the board's thinking, and to make sure we do not ever have to confront a situation of non-submission of financials again. So colleagues, I think we can leave with that and note that submission of that legal opinion and then proceed, and then just request Ben, please contact Honorable Liz is having difficulty joining the meeting and linking up with IT. All right, Minister,
yes,
I'll hand over. All right.
Sorry, sir. Yes, I've already communicated that message to IT. They are attending to it.
Okay. Sure. All right. Other colleagues, we are fine. See, I'm used to seeing your body language and then I respond to that. So I'll keep checking every now and again if you are good. Right. Minister, let's hand over to you then, and then you can proceed with the other matters.
Okay, Chair. So the second issue that was raised in the letter was the matter of bailouts. And what you have provided from the department is a table which takes us from 2003-04 up to 2019-20. It sets out the cash injections, the guarantees, how much was actually spent of the amount that was guaranteed or provided in cash, what was it spent on, and what the output was. So that is information you requested, Chair, and that information is in the table provided by the department. So that's for noting if you agree, and then if you agree, we then ask the Deputy Minister and the DG, acting DG to cover the issue of SA Express and the events unfolding there.
Minister, if we can get a summary of that submission, just for the record of what that slide says, and then we will proceed to the DM and the acting DG. So we will note the slide, just a summary.
Yeah, so in 2003-04, which is the first year that we cover, the detail is that there's recapitalization because SAA was still part of, I think, Transnet, following hedging losses and cash injection of 6 billion rands approximately, and all of it was used to cover those losses. 2005-06, it was a conversion of a loan to equity, again via Transnet, of 2.3 billion rands. Again, all of that was used to cover losses. 2006-07, support to restore a going concern issue, and that was a guarantee of 1.3 billion rands, and none of it was actually utilized as a guarantee. 2007-08, where labor restructuring costs of 744 million rands, of which it seems about 180 million rands was spent. Together with VAT, the total 275 million rands. That was for voluntary severance packages. Again, in 2007-08 was the grounding of the 747-400s, and that was a guarantee of about 1.5 billion rands, and was used part of restructuring exercises, and about 1.5 billion rands was utilized, almost all of it. 2009-10, conversion of a subordinated loan to equity. Again, this was 1.549 billion rands, and all of that was used to settle a loan. Again, in 2009-10, support to restore going concern, a guarantee of 1.6 billion rands, and 388 million rands was utilized for air traffic liability guarantees. 12-13, support to restore again. So for the following 3 years, 12-13, 14-15, 16-17, were all guarantees given in order to support the going concern issues of 5 billion, 6.4 billion, and 4.7 billion. The first instance was to provide liquidity, and the other two was to meet the going concern requirements. In 2017-18 and 18-19, inputs of 10 billion and 5 billion respectively to settle debt. That was actually guaranteed, and all of that was used. 2019-20, 12.5 billion rands, of which 5 billion rands was utilized for recapitalization, 2 billion rands as working capital, 3.5 billion rands to settle bridging finance requirements, and 2 billion rands for utilized for working capital. And that gives us a total cash injection of 31.243 billion rands and guarantees of 19.114 billion rands. So that's the table, Chair. I've actually taken you through all of that.
All right.
All of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, I think we're good with that. We've read that into the record, and I think we're satisfied.
Chair, if I may interject here, I've just been on the line to Alfred Lees, who is a key member of this committee. He's been trying to log on. He is unable to log on. I have gone in and out of this, logged on, logged off, and I've just spoken to him. He's done exactly what I've done, and it's not possible. I think it's extremely important that he's connected. Otherwise, there's no oversight, really, from a key member of SCOPA.
Yeah, as I've indicated, I have asked Ben and I have communicated with Mr. Lees, and I'm asking IT to sort that out. So my understanding is that they are dealing with that. So yeah, but I note that, and Ben, Tombi, please move with the necessary urgency in that regard. Right, DM and Acting DG. On the SAX.
Thank you so much. Hello, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. We'd also like to see you, DM.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon to the honourable members of the committee. Chair, just to start with, in your opening remarks, you made reference to what would you like to focus on for this meeting. Perhaps you may give guidance. I'll talk just briefly on SAX. From the time we had met, I think the issue at most was the non-submission of financials. And subsequent thereto, those financial statements were tabled for consideration. But I may as well just add to say at the time, there was already the process of the business rescue practitioner underway, which I unfortunately should report that the business rescue practitioners proceeded to make an application for liquidation. As we speak, we have an appointed liquidation enterprise that is managing the pronounced provisional liquidation. That's very briefly the situation at SAX as we speak. We are, however, seeing that situation, particularly the impact that this is having on all those who are affected.
Honorable Chair.
Yes, all right.
Honorable Chair.
DM.
Yes.
Honorable Deputy Minister,
Yes.
apologies to interject.
Hold on. Honorable Hadebe, hold on. DM, we are battling to hear connectivity problem. Right. Can you try and sort your connection out, and the acting DG to continue? Dr. Guti, can I hand over to you whilst the DM tries to sort his connection out?
Thank you very much, Chair, and to the honorable members.
Honorable Chair.
Yes.
I don't think the Deputy Minister heard what you are saying. He's continuing to engage, and we have a terrible feedback and audio. Whoever is managing the group, can that person ensure that all those who are not speaking are muted? And can they communicate to the Deputy Minister that we're struggling to hear him? Because he's still continuing with his presentation.
All right, that's fine. Lebo, if you can help and just, okay, the Deputy Minister has muted. Acting DG, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again to the honorable members as well as colleagues that are in the room. Chair, as DM was saying that the business was placed into provisional liquidation on the 28th of April this year, and the liquidator is Mr. Aviwe Njamaga. In line with your invitation, Chair, we had invited Mr. Njamaga and the previous BRPs to join us in this session. Unfortunately, both could not make it. Njamaga did communicate to us to say that due to the short notice that, or rather short period that he has been in charge of the business, he's still getting to understand what has transpired. So in due course, he'll make himself available.
All right. Somebody, why is that acting DG muted? Rosani, please.
Sorry, Chair.
All right, no problem.
All right. I'm not sure which parts you missed, Chair.
Part of the that he would make himself available at a later stage. You can continue.
That was Mr. Aviwe Njamaga. And we had also communicated the community's request for the BRPs to make themselves available. They indicated that they are no longer in control of the business with the provisional liquidation. Therefore, they are not obligation to appear at the committee. So that's what we had received. Now, coming back to the state of the business, Chair, the business is in provisional liquidation. The BRPs had been unable to raise the post-commencement funding that would have enabled the business to continue to meet its financial obligations, including payment of salaries. And on the side of the department, we assisted management to put in an application to the UIF for the payment of salaries in April. So there was a partial payment in line with the rules of UIF to the employees. With the business being in liquidation, the COVID test requirements obviously demand that the business should be able to show that it can still continue to operate for the assistance to be extended. So we're unfortunately in a difficult position now with regard to that obligation going forward. But as things stand, the liquidator is in charge of the business going forward. And of course, in line with the liquidation processes, they will ensure that the of the business are met, or the financial liabilities are dealt with. Thank you, Chair.
All right. I think, colleagues, for now, can we note what the DM and the acting DG have said, and then we will schedule separately to deal more surgically with the issues of SA Express.
Are they right from that?
Pardon, Minister? All right. I think we can proceed in that fashion, because I would believe that we must also hear what the business rescue practitioners have to say, albeit that they are no longer in charge of the business, so that we can get a sense of what they found and then make the transition insofar as those issues are concerned. So I think we can proceed. Minister, the next matter was on COVID-19, so that we can then deal substantively with the SAA matters. I note Honorable Liz is here, so I think all the problems are now sorted. Honorable Liz?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Finally, I've managed to find an iPad and use that. The parliamentary laptop apparently doesn't have Chrome on it. Anyway, let's proceed.
All right, now that's fine. We will look at that after so that we don't have future difficulties. Colleagues, are we fine? All right, Minister, back to you.
Well, the pandemic, Chairperson, has had very significant impacts on aviation and, of course, more importantly, on the health of the citizens all over the world. But secondly, it has, as a result of the response in respect of lockdowns, had an impact on the economies across the world. And the sequencing of the pandemic, meaning when exactly it first made an impact in a particular country, but secondly, when it reached its peak, has varied across the world, depending on the extent to which different countries have actually succeeded in what we are now familiar with as the flattening of the curve. Most countries, but not all, have engaged in one or other form of what we call lockdown today, and they're emerging very slowly in that regard. But one dimension of lockdowns has been the closure of borders. And that closure of borders meant the closure of international flights, and in many instances, domestic flights as well. The impact, if one sums it up globally, has been a devastating one. Major airlines like Delta have 650 planes that are parked off. Others are parking their planes in the desert in Arizona. If one looks at the British situation, Virgin Atlantic is in serious trouble and requesting bailouts from the British government. If we take Qantas in Australia, they've actually also grounded most of their flights, if not all initially. And so throughout the world, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Australia, whether it's India, or the European countries, in each of these instances, grounding of domestic flights and grounding of international flights has been a common feature. Now, the restart, well, that's the first aspect. The second aspect is the impact on the finances of airlines. Airlines, as you know, or aviation generally, is a very narrow margin business. And as a consequence, in many different countries, airlines are requesting financial assistance in one form or another from their respective governments. The third aspect is the impact on employees. And in this particular regard, if one takes Qantas as an example, 20,000 employees were sent home. Some asked to use their leave, others asked to stay without pay. In other instances, there's a furlough system where part of your salary is paid either by the company or by the state, but you remain in the employ of the company. In yet other instances, tens of thousands of workers in airlines have been asked to basically leave their jobs in one form or another. In all the commentary coming from the International Airline Association and other travel groupings globally has been that the restart of aviation is going to be slow. It's going to depend on the manner in which borders are reopened. It's going to depend on whether the opening of the borders is orchestrated in the right kind of way, because the shutdowns happen per country. And ideally, in the view of IATA, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, should be coordinating the reopening of borders and therefore the reopening or restart of flights. But that hasn't happened yet. Some of the airlines are now engaging in domestic flights. Some of the examples of what we might foresee for the next, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months possibly, can be seen in the US, where aircraft that have 100 seats or more are basically taking 20 or 30 passengers. They are grappling with the question of what social distance means, what sanitizing means. Some are grappling with the issue of encouraging passengers to wear masks. Some passengers are agreeing to, other passengers are not. So there's a diversity of responses, but the bottom line is that the load factors, that is the number of passengers per aircraft and per seats available on an aircraft, are going to take a long time to recover, largely because of fear on the one hand, reluctance to travel. But we've all learned, as this committee is actually operating as well, to do business in a different way. Might be uncomfortable, but this is possibly the new way in which the business sector and others might actually conduct their business into the future, i.e. using these conferencing mechanisms as opposed to business travel. And the best predictions are that it will take about 3 years for the aviation industry globally to recover in any shape or form to speak of. But if the load factors are low, and fortunately the oil prices have been low as well, the prices that airlines are going to charge are going to be quite significant. One airline, I don't want to name it, but it has been in the news in the United States, was putting 2 passengers in a 3-seater arrangement, and both the passengers then shared the cost of the middle seat. So those are the kinds of experiments, if you like, that different countries and airlines are going through. Coming to South Africa, we are not going to be saved from the impact of the pandemic as well. SAA is but one example, and the business rescue practitioners will give you an illustration of what this has meant for them and for the airline. But there are other airlines as well that find themselves in difficulty in one form or another. And there are all sorts of speculations and conversations going on about what the aviation scene, if you like, would look like into the future. And in terms of the current planning of lowering the lockdown levels, level 2 is when domestic travel is supposed to take place. But there have already been some modeling that has been happening, which shows that with the kind of load factors that can be anticipated at the start-off stage or start-up stage, airline tickets are going to be pretty expensive. Linked to all of this, Chairperson, is tourism. And a major factor as far as both international and continental travel into and out of South Africa is concerned, let alone domestic travel, is the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on tourism. And the question will be, when would people across the world find themselves comfortable to travel? You can see that there are current discussions in the European Union about tourism being reactivated in some form or the other. There's speculation that if the pandemic is at a particular level in one country and at a similar level in another country, then you could have travel between the one and the other. But that's all at the moment speculation, if you like, but also debated. And what eventually will come out will be what happens in the northern summer and whether the population would take the risk or the opportunities depending on how one views the situation.
All right.
So in the case of SAA, as I said, The pandemic has certainly made an impact, but its real impact is going to be when one or more of the airlines begin to, or all of them, begin to fly, and whether they're going to fly at a rate that is affordable to the South African public, and the stage at which the South African public is going to be comfortable with the kind of rules that the aviation authorities are going to implement as far as airline traffic is concerned. Now, these are situations and issues that are evolving over time, and what we could do, Chair, is in the next week or so, take the latest IATA information and other information that is available and make it available to members of the committee. So I end the COVID presentation, if you like, in the general sense with that.
All right. No, thank you very much for that. I think SAA, of course, was served with a double whammy. It was already in trouble and found itself having to grapple with the realities of COVID-19. And I think what you have detailed is on point insofar as the general understanding which is out there, and of course finding ways and means to navigate those realities. It's regrettable, but it's that's how the cookie crumbles. Yeah. All right. Let's colleagues go to the business rescue practitioners to take us through.
In respect of business rescue, Chair, just by way of introduction, and then you can then take the presentation from the practitioners, and then they could answer questions addressed to them, and I will answer questions addressed to us. Is that okay with you?
That's fine. Because we had last touched base with you in their presence, so let's transition correctly. But right, over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Now, I thought there were a few issues that we needed to emphatically clear up so that there's no misunderstanding amongst us, or a common base of understanding amongst us. The first is that government had the intent for some time to enter into a restructuring process for SAA, which would enable it to become more financially viable, more competitive, but also less dependent on the fiscus. We then get to a situation in late November, early December 2019, which regrettably ended up in a situation where the board of SAA made a decision on the 5th of December, formally notified the CIPC on the 6th of December that business rescue is the better option to pursue at that particular point in time, given the constraints on raising finance either from the fiscus or from lenders in South Africa. But the business rescue process, Chair, in terms of Chapter 6 of the Companies Act, is about making sure, depending on a particular range of activities that have to be undertaken, which I will clarify in a moment, that once you start the business rescue process, the outcome should be a viable business, or inverted commas, a rescued business. And late in 2019 and early in 2020, government made it quite clear that as far as government was concerned, and often we mistake government for individuals, so these are not individual decisions that the department is implementing, it's government decisions that the department is implementing, that the restructuring of SAA must continue, albeit through the business rescue process as we actually stand. I've covered, and that at the end of the day, this is what we would call a national interest matter. Although there are many private sector companies that are also involved in this particular set of issues. The Companies Act does specify a number of things that have to be undertaken during business rescue. And for that purpose, we've provided a copy of Chapter 6 of the Companies Act to members, so that in case we have to refer to specific sections, you have a copy available for you and to you. In that legislation, there are distinct roles prescribed for the shareholder, for labor, of issues that we as the department and government have been undertaking. So I once again want to firstly emphasize that the product, if you like, of business rescue, as we indicated to you when we met you in February, is firstly a decision about whether the business is in financial distress, which it was. Secondly, whether the business is rescuable, and clearly in terms of sections 147 and 148 of the Act, the Creditors Committee and the Employees Committee were informed at various stages that it would be rescuable. In terms of section 141 of the Act, the BRPs are required to investigate all financial and other aspects. And in terms of section 150, subsection 5, the business rescue plan should be produced in 25 days, with, of course, the provision that there could be extensions. But I imagine nobody anticipated an extension of 5 months in this process. This is, as we said in February, Chair, a unique occasion, if you like, where there's very little aviation experience amongst business rescue practitioners, if any, and a consultancy called Airways was called in. And what we've learned from some of the material that we've seen quite recently is that Airways had done its homework in respect of both the diagnostic and in terms of what the future airline might look like by the end of January 2020. Then there's a question of money, which will be raised, but this is also the area that overlaps between, and the accounting officer of the department can come in on this later on. But government arranged for, in the first instance, 2 billion. It didn't immediately raise the other 2 billion that it promised for various logistical and legal reasons. That was managed by the National Treasury. But eventually, a loan of 3.5 billion rands was found and arranged by the DBSA to assist the post-commencement finance. And I think the business rescue practitioners will take you through the cascade of spending. But what is also critical is the amount of money that was spent on fees by various players in this particular process. And one of the requirements in terms of restructuring, Chair, would be how do you, if you like, stretch or optimize the use of the 5.5 billion rands? And what are the cost-cutting mechanisms that are available and have in fact been utilized? Is it the question of just cutting routes? Is it a question of just deferring payments to certain players? Is it getting rid of onerous contracts? Is it trying to trim down the salaries, which are quite excessive at the top end of management? And other instances where there are, if you like, extravagant arrangements that have cost the airline quite severely over many years. So the premise from a government point of view would be that at some stage, a business rescue plan would inform any financial requests that are being made. In other words, should the fiscus supply money just because there's a request for money, or should it supply money on the basis of a plan? And of course, the latter is our preference, because then we know that the money is being used in order to achieve the objective of the business rescue exercise. Part of which, of course, has to be to remove wastage in the system, amongst other things that are actually required as well. So a copy of a draft business rescue plan was given to us on the 5th of May. It might have been given to other players as well, which upon consultation with our own legal advisors was found to be extremely deficient. And it is in this regard that we also, over the last 6 weeks or so, have employed the services of a aviation expert company to say that in the current kind of environment which I've just described, let's call it the post-COVID environment, what could an airline look like? What are some of the constraints that it will face? And how do we start off a new airline, so to speak, as well? The last one or two points I want to raise is in respect of labor. And in this regard, Chair, we have with the cooperation of all 8 trade unions that are recognized within SAA, managed to create, with their participation and cooperation, a labor consultative forum where all of them are represented. They have signed on to a compact that we were going to distribute. I'm not sure whether we have. Secondly, they have participated in 1 or 2 technical workshops where representatives of the unions have participated in designing a future airline and making a contribution. And most recently, in the last week or so, they've made an important contribution to the rescue process and the emergence of an alternative by undertaking a salary sacrifice, which hadn't been done for the 5 months preceding this particular period. We are currently working with them on a social plan for those people that will not be accommodated, and that involves training, it involves assistance from the Skills Development Fund, it involves assistance from the UIF, and once we have a product in that regard, Chair, we can make that available to you as well. But I want to compliment the unions for their cooperation and participation in this process, which has been immensely successful. There have been a whole lot of discussions and offers to purchase one thing or another in respect of SAA's assets, but at this point in time, we don't know how to differentiate between what is genuine and what isn't. So there's a screening process that is being undertaken that we will look at as well. So let me emphasize that government is very aware of the implications of COVID-19. It is very aware that this business rescue process needed to be concluded a long time ago. And most importantly, that what we require is, as an outcome of this process, is the initial objective of a viable airline, retaining as many workers as we could and saving as many jobs as we could, which is quite important in the current economic context, but also making this airline non-reliant upon the fiscus itself. So let me stop there, Chair. If there's other information that's required, and if we have it, we're willing to share that with the committee and others that are listening in as well. And then ask the business rescue practitioners to present their case, and then we will respond to any questions that you have. And at some stage, the Acting Director General will come in on the question of what are his obligations as an accounting officer in relation to the PFMA. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister, for that background. I do want to stress that we remain concerned, particularly at the fact that at our last meeting, in the presence of the business rescue practitioners, we were going to have met immediately or shortly after the 6th of March. And COVID or no COVID, the fact that that did not happen has not sat well with us, and of course that's because of the extension. Why I raise this as the business rescue practitioners come in is that it's important to be committed to your own commitments. and to be able to do things within the prescribed time so that we can bring about certainty for the process and importantly for oversight and accountability. And so I think that the business rescue practitioners must have that in mind, that we hold a very dim view to delays. And it's precisely why the board can attest we've held a dim view to the non-submission of financials, because we believe that timeframes are the guiding principle of oversight and accountability in getting things done. So having said that, can the business rescue practitioners come in and so that members can then field questions? Members, I'll request that you, as I indicated earlier, in our WhatsApp group, just indicate to me so that when we want to ask questions, then I can line you up. So I'll hand over to the business rescue practitioners and understanding, of course, that this is the first time that they are actually speaking to us. I'll ask them to be very patient and to be very thorough so that we can actually be able to go through everything and so that members can have the benefit of interrogating on the other hand.
Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, are you still there? It appears as if we have lost you or something terribly went wrong with the connection. Honorable members, am I the only one?
I can hear you, Mr. Hadebe. I can hear nobody else.
Hadebe, I can hear you.
We've lost the chair.
I can hear participants. I can't hear the presenters.
No, sorry about that. The challenges of rural life. I was disconnected momentarily. The business rescue practitioners, can you come in, please?
All the things, it's not all of it, it's not yours, all of it, not all yours. Go now.
Hello, colleagues, can we be in order? Can you mute, please? Can you mute?
Oh, you've got yours. Here is yours. Here is yours. Here is your talk.
And somebody, right. As I was saying, I had the unfortunate issue of disconnection, right? Business rescue practitioners, over to you.
Okay, Siviwe, are you going to take the presentation, please? Hello?
Yes, we are awaiting now the business rescue practitioners.
Siviwe, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair. Apologies, I was on mute. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister and Honorable members of the committee and senior officials from the department. I've got a presentation, Honorable Chair, that I'm going to put on the screen, if with your permission.
That's fine. You can proceed with that.
Mr. Chair, before he proceeds, how much time are we allocating for this presentation?
Well, the time now is 5 to 4. You can take us up to 20 past 4, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, can you confirm that you can see the presentation?
Well, I have put my presentation up myself. Members, if you've got difficulty, please indicate. But members, this was circulated, so.
If it was circulated, thank you, Chair. If we could just go to page, the index, effectively, briefly on the presentation, we talk about the business rescue plan and its development. And I must thank the Minister for the introduction because it helps a lot in the understanding of the business rescue process in line with Chapter 6 of the Act, as well as what is expected of business rescue practitioners. We then touch briefly on the timeline of where we have been, and then we deal a little bit with the contents of the draft business rescue plan, and we provide an answer to how we have used the monies that we have that have been lent into the business rescue process. We talk about some of the cost cutting initiatives, and we'll hopefully give a little bit more meat to some of the issues raised by the Minister. And at the end, we do have an annex around what are the key actions that have been taken by the business rescue practitioners since their appointment in December, as well as the impact of COVID-19. And I think the background that has been given by the Minister, excuse me, on the impact of COVID-19 is quite adequate. And if the Honorable Chair will indulge us, we may not have to go into that detail.
1 second, can I ask you to, as I indicated, if you are speaking, please do turn on your camera. If you are, so what do you want to please turn on your camera and then take us through your presentation until 20 past 4, please.
Thank you, Chair. I thought my camera.
All right, there you go. All right, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In the development of the business rescue plan, I think the important thing that we would like as the practitioners to present to the committee is that it is very important that we take cognizance of what is the objective of a business rescue as contemplated in the Companies Act. The Companies Act contemplates 2 objectives. What we consider to be a primary objective, which is to maximize the likelihood of a company continuing in existence in a solvent basis or on a solvent basis. Effectively, as the Minister had said, this is the outcome where the business is rescued, and this is what we deem to be a restructuring option. Failing which, there is a secondary objective of a business rescue, which would give a better return for creditors or a shareholder or shareholders than they would receive from the immediate liquidation of a company. And that's what we generally refer to as a winding down option. The important thing and a significant distinction between these 2 objectives is that if we are pursuing a restructuring option, it is important that the restructuring has got funding. And hence the Act in Section 135 talks about post-commencement finance, which is the funding that is lent to a company in business rescue to assist itself with the restructuring process and seek to ensure that the company is restored as a solvent company and continues as a going concern. Important around the availability of post-commencement finance, as we call it PCF, is that it helps when you have the right amount of PCF, and it also helps a great deal if you are able to receive the amount timeously. The importance of that, Chair and honorable members, is that we must always remember that a business that goes into business rescue, it is generally in financial distress. And cash is a very important thing for it to be able able to continue and is able to meet its obligations as they fall due. Without cash, it becomes a short exercise into liquidation. Another important point about the restructuring option is that it needs to be clear what the outcome of a restructured business ought to be. And it is important to reiterate what the minister had said, that the desired outcome for SAA was that it would be a viable airline that is competitive and is not dependent on further government support, and is also able to attract a strategic equity partner. So an outcome towards which you are restructuring a company is absolutely critical. And in the context of that, then you are able to develop a business rescue plan anticipating that restructuring.
But I think for the want of time, let us go into the substantive matters insofar as SAA is concerned. If any member is unclear of the business rescue process, procedures, they can come back to it. But I think this was adequately explained in February when you appeared before us. I think let us shoot straight to the processes undertaken at SAA now, so that we can deal with that. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think the reason I made this, it was to give context to the timeline, which is in my next slide, as well as saying that in the absence of a restructuring, it would be then a winding down option. But proceeding to the next slide in the timeline, we had anticipated at the beginning of a business rescue that we would indeed have a business rescue plan. And the business rescue plan for the restructuring, we had anticipated that we would have a plan in after February, after the end of February. As you rightly mentioned, that we had spoken about the date of the 6th of March. And an important issue for us from a business rescue team point of view was the commitment for the restructuring funding, and that was anticipated to have been in the budget. We would recall that in the budget, 16.4 billion was allocated to SAA, and the 16.4 comprised legacy debt, as well as the 5.5 billion that we had received as part of post-commencement finance, as well as interest. And the budget went on to say that the restructuring funds for SAA will be prioritized elsewhere in the budget. And because of that, there was a level of certainty as to how much the restructuring of SAA was actually going to receive from government, which is why we then had required that extension. On the 15th of March, there was a declaration of the state of disaster by the president, and at that time, we had circulated the draft business rescue plan for discussion, anticipating the restructuring funding. However, on the 21st of March 2020, SAA ceased flying international and regional flights as a consequence of the lockdown and as a consequence of the banning of flights from high-risk countries, and mainly Europe. We then seek on the 26th of March, which we, at the time we were in a lockdown, we requested an extension of the publication of the business rescue plan to the end of May, given the uncertainty that was caused on the airline industry and the shutdowns by COVID-19. And I must hasten, Chair and honorable members, that we as SAA were not unique in being affected in that manner by COVID-19. On the 26th of March, we ceased flying domestically. The importance of all of this, Chair, is that when SAA went into business rescue on the 5th of December, the company suffered significantly in terms of forward bookings. The consequence of that is that revenue generated by the company from sales of tickets had reduced significantly. This was further exacerbated in January when some of the travel partners and insurances indicated that they would not support the sale of tickets for SAA, which then meant that SAA became significantly dependent on the monies that it received from funding, which is a post-commencement funding, in order for it to continue with its operations. We then, as business rescue practitioners, had been in conversation with the minister and the department, and on the 2nd of April, we had written a letter to the department requesting confirmation of funding for business, for the restructuring of the airline. And on the 10th of April, we got a letter on the 13th of April, a letter dated the 10th of April, which indicated that government was not in a position, as a consequence of COVID, amongst other things, to provide any further funding to the airline for the purposes of the restructuring under the business rescue. And the letter outlined that there would be no extension of borrowing limits, there would be no extension of guarantees, and there will be no funding for the restructuring. On the basis of that letter, we advised on the 14th of April all affected parties and indicated to them the impact of that. On the back of that, we then, on the 23rd of April, issued another notice to all affected parties indicating that the business rescue practitioners will be pursuing a winding down option in the absence of funding to pursue a restructuring option. And the rationale for the winding down option, Chair and honorable members, was that it would yield a better return to the shareholder and to creditors than would be a case for an immediate liquidation of the airline or a provisional liquidation of the airline. But more importantly, given the context of COVID and the lockdowns and the uncertainty around how long the lockdown is going to be, and as the minister, I think, outlined very clearly, referring to some of the issues that are currently being discussed within the airline and aviation industry around how is the airline industry going to be opened, what is the nature of the opening of the airline industry gradually in a manner that is responsible, that would ensure that the lives of passengers are not affected. This issue became equally important for us to say, in the context of COVID, what would be the best way forward in the absence of any funding. More importantly, at the time, we were also aware that it was in the interest of the shareholder originally to maintain a viable airline. And the question therefore becomes, how do we, in a winding down process, create an opportunity for the shareholder and government to continue having an airline? It's important, Chair, moving on the context of the draft business rescue plan, to highlight briefly that, in January, the government had made its selection, and its selection was to have a restructured airline, and as part of that, it would enable that the group of companies within the SAA be kept, which means SAA itself, SAA Technical, Air Chefs, and Mango, as well as the divisions. It was important that the company is restructured to get rid of inefficiencies and also to save approximately 5,000 jobs in the SAA group. The cost of the restructuring initially had been pegged at 7.7 billion, And the 7.7 billion was intended to achieve a number of things. One, it is important that we remember at the time that SAA went into business rescue, creditors that were owed money by the airline have remained in moratorium and have not been paid. And as part of a business rescue plan, it was important for us to be able to indicate to the body of creditors whose monies are in moratorium, what dividend we would like to pay them, and table that as part of the meeting for the approval of the business rescue plan. So in the restructuring funding, therefore, was a budget for the payment of a dividend to creditors. The second bucket was that there would be retrenchment costs for both SAA and its subsidiaries, because there was a recognition that there would be job losses. The third bucket was that there would be recapitalization of the subsidiaries, and certain amounts of money would be allocated to Airships, to SA Technical, as well as Mangum. And lastly, there would be working capital provided for SAA to assist it, given the fact that when it went into business rescue, it was illiquid. And finally, there would be amount allocated for the restructuring costs of the airline. In terms of how the monies have been received in the business rescue, it's important, as the minister indicated, that at the beginning, the airline had been provided 4 billion, 2 billion of which was immediately available, and there was a delay in receiving the second 2 billion up until the DBSA stepped in and provided the airline with 3.5 billion. When we were in the initial meeting in Parliament, the Honourable Chair would recall that the Minister had indicated that it was anticipated at that time that the airline would have exhausted its funds by the 20th of March. Now, it is important to recall that in addition to receiving the 5.5 billion from lenders, which is the BSA and the banks, all of which was supported by government providing a government guarantee to the lenders, that we had started initiatives after discussions with travel partners in the airline industry as well as insurers to make sure that they come back on board and support the airline and enable the sale of tickets through their platforms. As part of that process, then we were able to increase before lockdown our ticket sales, and there was an uptick in the ticket sale due to some of the marketing initiatives that were undertaken. More importantly, we had also made a significant decision around, in the interim, shutting down some of the routes that were loss-making in order to extend the cash runway for the airline. In terms of the amount of money that has been utilized then, Honorable Chair, by the airline from the 5th of December to the end of April, we indicate that the total spend was 9.9 billion, so around 10 billion. And in this slide, we provide a detail of how that money was utilized. However, this slide summarizes well that 20% of the cost of the amount was paid to fuel suppliers. About 16% went to salaries and related costs. 12% was paid to subsidiaries for services that they render to support SAA. 12% was paid for the leasing of aircraft. 12% was paid over to Airlink for the passengers that Airlink is flying coming out of the SAA platform, and the remaining 28% for various costs that have been outlined in the waterfall in the slide before.
All right, I would request to start winding down.
I am winding down, Chair. This is the last slide, which are the cash management initiatives. As part of the business rescue process, Chair, we undertook a number of initiatives to manage cash and make sure that we extend the runway that the cash in our possession within the airline is extended. How did we do that? We assessed a number of contracts in what we term value for money. And essentially, as part of this process, then we would renegotiate a number of contracts. For example, we renegotiated a number of contracts with the lessors, for example, which resulted in up to 40% discounts. Further, to the extent that certain of the contracts had onerous provisions, where, for example, they required retainers, they required commissions, we suspended the payment of retainers and the payment of such commissions. We also identified contracts where there were duplications or non-essential services, or contracts that were expensive, which means contracts that the price of those contracts was above commercial terms, and we canceled some of them. We also renegotiated the payment terms of many contracts, and the issue of payment terms is very important, because at the point of a company going to business rescue, a significant number of creditors at that point refuse to provide services and goods to a company in business rescue on terms and conditions, which means where in a normal scenario, you are able to get goods and services and pay in 30 days or in 40 days, many of the suppliers now require you to pay them upfront. They require you to pay on a COD basis, and some of them actually require advance payments for future services. And the impact of that is a significant drain on the working capital of a company. And so the renegotiation of those payment terms becomes absolutely critical in making sure that the company is able to maintain healthy cash balances. We've mentioned the issue of the suspension of loss-making routes, both domestically, regionally, and internationally, and we developed we developed a way of a model for the assessment of routes in order to make sure that going forward, working towards a restructured airline would have an objective way of assessing whether or not routes are actually making losses. And finally, as part of this, we also assessed a number of outsourced services with a view to insource them going forward. And however, we also recognize that as part of an insourcing of some of these services, there would be an initial capital injection. So I'll end there, Chair, at this point. It's 4:22.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that, colleagues, we had received the presentation prior. So if anything that the BRT had not gone through, you will be able to pick that up in the presentation. I've got 3 hands so far, Honorable Somyo, Honorable Liz, and Honorable Kachalia. Honorable Somyo, you are first off the bat. Honorable Mente, noted. Babu Somyo. All right, Babu Somyo, are you there? All right, let's take Honorable Liz, and we'll come back to Babu Somyo. Honorable Liz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I thank you to the presenters and for the documentation that was sent through. Much of it is quite frightening, but nevertheless, it's good to finally get to see some figures for for the airlines. I just want to clarify, are we running this on a hearing basis? Can I get answers to my questions as I go along?
No, we're running it as a briefing. It's not a hearing.
Okay, that's really not satisfactory, because questions will follow on other questions, I'm afraid. So I'll need to come back at a later stage. So
No,
I'll keep my questions as...
We will take another round of questions. So if your question is not responded to, we will not in a particular rush.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the first questions are directed at Les Mattison. I would request that he answer the questions and not Sivewe or anyone else. So the first question is, and Les, is to you: can SAA be rescued without any further funding from the state? A simple question, please. Can it be rescued without any funding from the state? In other words, either on its own resources, or have you got sources of funding from external sources? On page 3 of your presentation, you talk about the winding down option. Can you explain to me where in the section of the Act it makes provision for such an option as opposed to liquidation? If you are of the opinion, in response to my first question, that the airline cannot be rescued without further state funding, and given that the state has made it quite clear that there will be no further funding at this point, why have you not filed for liquidation?
Okay.
What percentage of salaries is being paid to the flight crews as of the 1st of April? Are they on unpaid leave, or are they getting a 50% of their pay? How much is the management of the airline being paid? What percentage of their salaries is being paid to them since the 1st of April, including the chief pilot? Have you now paid to SARS all outstanding PAYE, UIF, and SDL payments? Have you caught up on that?
Can you hear me?
I noticed on your slide 5 that you don't appear to... I'm listening.
Sir?
No, there was somebody who was chipping in or raising a order. I'm just saying, can they wait? We will take the questions and then come to responses.
Okay.
So,
thanks, Mr. Chairman. In terms of your slide 5, Les, you don't indicate, I cannot see any indication there that the 2 billion rand that was provided to SAA in December has been repaid. Has it been repaid?
No, it's been used.
So it's still owed.
Yeah.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, Les, I'd love you to answer the questions as I go along. That's what I like, but the chair has ruled that you have to write them down and answer them after we've asked you all the questions.
I think it might, Chair, so Honourable Chair, I think it would be a lot easier if I could answer Mr. Lisa's questions as we go. That's possible, please.
I will request that you take the questions as they are being put and you will respond to them as a team.
Okay.
So,
Honourable Chair, I do not want to interject, but can I request Honourable List to please just fill us in on his preference of a person that must answer question, yet we have 2 business rescue practitioners. Is he indicating?
business rescue practitioners are going to answer the questions.
No, but he specifically said, I only want...
Yes, and I'm fully entitled to ask my questions to any particular person, and I'm directing my questions to Mr. Matt. Please, Mr. Chairman, protect me.
Colleagues, let's not degenerate.
I'm not, Chair, I'm asking a question.
Yes, but I've noted your question.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Wait. Otherwise, I'm going to mute all of you. The issue is...
I have the floor.
Colleagues, can we actually just have a sense of calmness about each other? Everybody's going to have an opportunity to raise their issues, and all questions are going to be responded to.
Chair, I'm very calm. My assumption and understanding is that questions are tabled.
I'm making a ruling on your matter now, right? And I'm saying to you, the business rescue practitioners, as a delegation to the committee, will respond to the questions.
Thank
you. The ministry will respond to ministry-related questions, and the department will answer to departmental-related questions. And as we have indicated on SA Express, the Deputy Minister is here, and that's within his purview. In as much as we will schedule a meeting for SA Express, if there's a pressing matter, the Deputy Minister will respond. So,
I do not want...
No. Wait.
No, but Chair, I wanted to make my point. I don't want a perception that some rescue practitioners are more capable than the other. Therefore, one will choose who must answer and not. That we cannot allow, Chair. Thank you.
Well, the business rescue practitioners, as I'm saying, are here as a delegation, and they will respond to the questions.
Mr. Chairman, may I request that the questions are put and then the business...
we are going to take questions. We're going to take questions at once for the want of management of time. Otherwise, if we engage in a dialogue on one-on-one, it's not going to help. That's the issue. I'm trying my level best to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. If it was the normal way, we would have conducted this as a hearing, but unfortunately, the circumstances do constrain us to an extent. And so that's why I'm craving for everybody's indulgence and for calmness, and for us to treat each other fairly and with mutual respect. Right, Honorable Liz, you are on the floor, and I request that you wind up, and then we'll come in again in the second round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I make the point again, I am entitled to ask whoever I choose to answer questions. Mr. Chairman, I'll move on now to the
Let's
Minister.
not now make an issue out of that. Let's not make an issue out of that. That's why I'm saying...
I'm not making the issue, Mr. Chairman. So let us move on.
Your ruling is final. You must not provoke us.
All right. I know we have not seen each other in a while. I know that. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move on now to Minister Gordon. Minister, can you please give us some kind of indication? You indicated that you had refused, well, it was my understanding, perhaps I got it wrong, that the refusal to provide the 7.7 billion rand that the business rescue practitioners were asking for in April was because there was no approved business rescue plan. Is my understanding then that if there is an approved business rescue plan, that the funding that plan would require, whatever the amount may be, will be made available by the state to the airline? And then the question of the Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure who this question goes to, but perhaps it goes to the business rescue practitioners. But there have been a number of repatriation of South African citizens' flights undertaken by SAA over the last month or so. These have been expensive flights, and there's been funding involved here. What has been the funding arrangement for these flights? Many of the passengers, if not all, I'm not sure, have paid for their seats on these flights. Who has funded the total cost of these flights, and have the monies from these flights all gone into SAA? Has DIRCO taken any of the money, or have any agents been appointed who may have taken some of the funding?
All right. Can I ask you to?
Mr. Chairman, the last question then involves probably the Deputy Minister. On what basis, if indeed my information is correct, is the state going to oppose the liquidation of SA Express? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Honorable Kachalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions for the business rescue practitioner.
Honorable Kachalia.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, two for the minister and two for the business rescue practitioners. For the business rescue practitioners, I'd like to know, and this is in support largely of my colleague, in terms of the Companies Act, how does government get to select an option that business rescue puts forward? By writing a check clearly that it is unable to cash on any reasonable basis, either responsibly or in the face of the huge demands of COVID. Secondly, if business rescue's job is to rekindle a company on a solvent basis, but requires, as they say, funding in large measure from government to do so, which is not forthcoming, then surely it needs to move to liquidation. In terms of the minister's comments, in respect of the global aviation industry, which he mapped out and very little else, I'd like to understand if, as he says, clearly the best of breed are in ICU, how can the worst now be resuscitated? And finally, a simple question: is government going to continue to hand out bailouts to SAA, and is it going to, or its successor, which emerges in some way, shape, or form, as yet unclear, out of the phoenix-like ashes of its demise? Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
All right, Honorable Somyo, are you there?
I'm there, Chair.
Okay. Noted connection problem. All right, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for the report. Substantively, I think some of the matters have been dealt with by Honorable Leas. What I wanted to venture in is the area that relates to the life of the business rescue practitioners. I take it that through the ministry's outline, even of the Companies Act, that there are specific things that ought to be done on specific instances. One of those is the question which determines the line of action of the business rescue practitioner in terms of the production of the plan. And that plan has to be agreed to by the parties that are involved. In this instance, the minister confirms that a draft was deposited with them, and the draft was deemed to be inadequate for its acceptance as the outcome of a preparedness of what ought to be done by the practitioners. In absence of that plan, how would you see the continuum of critical actions taken by the business rescue practitioners requiring financing from the shareholder. Without that plan, the actual continuing with time, looking into the 5 months period that we have taken so far without a plan, let alone the court action wherein some of the labor unions have been successful, and the outcome based on the fact that whatever that the big business rescue practitioners are coming up with should be informed by that plan. And if you would want to take my questions on, they would want to suggest that even if the ministry would have given them additional funding as per the course of action for their own survival in terms of the post funding requirements, that ought to have been informed somewhat by the plan. And the absence of that plan becomes very critical for us to measure substantively their own continuing act in as far as their own appointment is concerned. How dare would you find out that even those who ought to give the extensions to continue to giving such extensions up to this stage, where there is no indication where the practitioners are somewhat going. Having heard that the minister is of the view that government has put forward in terms of the objectives of the business rescue, going towards a viable airline, and therefore the work of the business rescue practitioners has been cut to look into that objective going forward, and any funding would want to enhance that kind of a capability. Here they are accounting to us today. Even today, there is no sight of that plan, and to make us comfortable as to indeed this is where they are going. Because even if you're going to wind, you see the company, the basis of winding off the company should be as well be predicated on the fact that here is the plan. Here is the hardship in terms of that plan. What we hear is that there must be money. There must be money. There must be money. And there is no plan in terms of how the utilization of such finances are concerned. And the last point for me, Chair, would be that at this period, a substantive amount has been put to use. Well, there is value to it because SAA is flying even today. But I think that through the ministry, it might be of necessity that at least to cushion the fact that there is sound and reasonable act in as far as utilization of such amount to the tune of 5.5 billion rand, as what has actually been done by the business rescue practitioner in the utilization of such amounts. Maybe some form of work need to be done and presented to us at some stage, whether through a fine audit of such amounts, because we're talking about the life of an institution which has been somewhat in existence. The actual objective way that the government would want to see this airline going towards, and there is continuing use of fiscus and support around those matters. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Honourable. So there's a lot of mention of the plan, which the minister has said in their assessment was deficient. But of course, we don't have the benefit of that plan. So can I request that be forwarded to us so that we can have a look at it and make a meaningful assessment? Because I think members will be handicapped to speak in generalizations about this plan in the absence of actually having seen it and then pass judgment on it, because I think it's central to the discussion which we are having now. It's probably the link between the two narratives. So, Minister, if you can note that, and the business rescue practitioners, that we would like that plan to be submitted to us and for the distribution to members. Right, Honorable Mente, over to you. And colleagues, if you are speaking, please do turn on your camera. Right, Honorable Mente.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, my first point is also on the plan. And the minister earlier on cites that because of deficiencies, and they even requested legal opinion on the plan, he then made a conclusion that he cannot support SAA based on the plan. I don't know if I heard that correctly. We need to know he did not support the SAA based on the deficiencies on the plan, or he is not going to support it. And if it's because it was based on the deficiencies on the plan and the price thereof, which was placed there of 7.7 billion, what would be his preference of a figure that he can support to SAA? Then number two, when we parted ways, it's in February or March earlier, the last time we met, part of the things that SAA was going to do was to look into their operational costs. Now, if you look in their financials that they have forwarded to us in terms of operational losses versus the income, and the explanation thereof of such in note 5, it does not give any comfort as to why do we have 40+ billion in terms of accumulated figure. And it does not explain how did we get from where we are since 2017 and 2018, but it doesn't have 2019. However, it tells that at 2019, that's the status of the accumulated figure. I don't find comfort in that at all, because for me, for you to determine the losses, you ought to tell us step by step that in 2017, this is where we were, 2018, this is where we were, 2019, this is where we are. You cannot skip a year, yet make a determination of a figure. So where did you get a figure from? What then informs your figure if you do not have all the years in place? On the pie chart, business practitioner informs us that they did renegotiate some contracts, they renegotiated some payments, but their big number in terms of their financials is monies paid to creditors. And here on the pie chart, 28% is paid to other. Other is always problematic. I suppose then that we will get those details in the plan, because when you say you are spending money on other, did you cut on the logistic company that's unnecessary? Did you cut on the evergreen contracts that have inflated prices? Did you cancel contracts that were not necessary for the SAA? But what is other? We are made now to make assumptions that this is where the expenditure goes to. And it doesn't say anything to me, because for us to make a conclusion and support whatever they are saying in rescuing SAA, we ought to be very clear and transparent to each other in a way that it tells us that these are the contracts. It doesn't matter how much volume of paperwork or data you have to capture on an Excel spreadsheet to tell us what are these contracts you are paying. What are these leases you are doing? How far are you with the aircrafts? How many aircrafts does SAA have? How many do they lease? How much can you spare to buy new aircrafts and save SAA? There's nothing that's telling us of such. But all we know, all we see is that what we can do now, we're going to wind down. So when you're winding up a company, you wind it up because you have been informed of certain steps you've taken along the way. But those steps that were taken along the way, we are not made aware of them. Yet we must sign more money and give it to SAA. But then the money that we give to SAA is never accounted for. The minister also makes mention of the fact that they did not support the business practitioners' rescue plan. And then he makes mention of a new airline. It doesn't make sense to me. If you do have money for a new airline, yet you do not have money to rescue a current airline, how much are we talking about? A difference is going to be huge. There is no new airline that we can start from scratch at 7.7 billion. Let's assume that's the number, that's the figure which the business practitioners have put in their business rescue plan. That kind of amount cannot implement a whole new system and an airline. So hence my question earlier on to say, what would be his preferred figure in order to keep SAA afloat? But to cut its liquidity is to kill it down. The business rescue practitioners is part of the Companies Act, and there are steps before you go to liquidation. Those steps require government to take over, to support it. It's a state-owned entity. It will not make much of a profit, but if it can sustain itself, and the business rescue practitioners, that's what they are here to tell us. Can it sustain itself? If it cannot sustain itself, how much then do they need? But in which areas they themselves have saved it? Because earlier on when we met, we asked of a current plan. That was there was a turnaround strategy during the era of the previous CEO when we were at SAA. Mr. Jagana and the previous board, they gave us a turnaround strategy and areas of saving, as well as responding to the open water investigation and the report of open water. So all those things, we are supposed to know about them. We are supposed to be told that this is where we are and this is where we come from. These are the savings we have made. However, they are not sufficient to deal with the situation or turn the situation around. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Honorable Hadebe, and then we'll go to responses and then take the second.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. And shoot straight to the point. To the business rescue practitioners.
Questions? Honorable Hadebe.
Yes, okay. There's an echo that is disturbing me on the background, Chair.
No, just continue. You're hearing you just fine.
Thank
continue.
you. To business rescue practitioner, Chair, do they think they have the requisite skills and expertise in aviation to rescue SAA? I'm asking this on the basis of the Companies Act that spells out clearly that the business rescue practitioner ought to have tabled a business rescue plan within 25 days. Instead, the practitioners kept on asking for extension after extension. In the process, close to 10 billion of taxpayers' money have been exhausted. To date, we still do not have a business rescue plan. Now, the question that I would like to get an understanding, and I want them to be honest with us, Because it seems as if we are going back to square one, where a bailout after a bailout for SAA that does not yield positive outcome. 10 billion within a space of 4 months, yet the plan has not been produced. Chair, did the business rescue practitioner tabled a draft plan as per Section 151 of the Companies Act, and Section 152 spells out exactly how the plan ought to be considered. And if the plan is not accepted or rejected as per Section 152, Section 153 kicks in. And if those have not transpired, do they honestly think they are still the relevant parties to continue executing the mandate that they ought to have executed within 25 days? It's a pity, Chair, we don't have the interaction session where I will get a response before I proceed to my next question. And Chair, within that process, we have seen illegal things where the union had to even go to court to stop the process of retrenchment. You cannot retrench before you have tabled the plan. Now, all those happenings, Chair, to me seeks to suggest one thing, that perhaps, and this question I want to direct to the shareholder, to the minister, why did they kept quiet when the plan was not tabled within 25 days? Why they kept quiet when extension after extension were requested? And secondly, according to the presentation of the business rescue practitioner, of which also I find it strange, they are saying towards the conclusion of the finalization of their plan, only then they consulted the affected person. Honorable Chair, in terms of Section 150 of the Companies Act, it's very clear. You do not consult after you have drafted the plan. You first consult the creditors and affected person and the management, and then you prepare a plan. Why did they do things the other way around, as per their presentation, that towards the finalization of their plan, they then consulted the affected person? And why did the shareholders allow such a process to unfold in contravention of the Act? Let me pause there for now, Chair. I will come back on the later stage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. I just a few questions to sort of tie this round down. The first one is, if SAA is to be restructured, and the operative word there is if, because at this stage it does not seem there's any certainty in terms of the direction which will go. The question then becomes, how are the subsidiaries going to be affected? If we can get a response to that. In the what you call the financials, your impairments increased in 2018 from 26 million to 568 million. And this, of course, contributed to the loss. So if you can unpack for us which of these accounts were impaired and for how much. And then the business rescue practitioners, Section 1412C2 of the Companies Act speaks of contraventions of the law, and that the practitioners must forward evidence to the appropriate authority for further investigation and possible prosecution. What have you uncovered? What has been done? What have you preferred? Because it's important that we couple this process with consequence management. An airline can't just tank, for lack of a better phrase, I suppose, crash, and there's no consequences. It does not sit well with me that in this whole process we have not seen a move towards consequences. Minister, you applauded the unions But at the same time, the unions, or a union, had to take SAA to court. I'm wanting to reconcile the two, and I would like to hear from the business rescue practitioners the extent of engagements insofar as their stakeholder relations is concerned, insofar as unions are concerned. Because if we're speaking about cooperation, then it baffles the mind that you would have to find each other in court. Right, and then finally is the following. In all the generalizations that we speak about, and of course notwithstanding the fact that I've asked that the business rescue plan be submitted to the committee, is if we are to restructure, or if we are to have a new airline, what is the cost of that? Because what we must not do is to continue throwing financial solutions to non-financial problems. Right, so we'll hand over to the Minister, the business rescue practitioners and the DM for them to answer their questions, and then we'll come to the second round and then tie it down and map out a way forward in that regard. Right, Honourable Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to the members for the various questions that were asked. I'm going to do some delegation, if you don't mind, Chairperson, with your permission. Those matters that are related to the financials, the representatives of the board must address those because they are most familiar with those facts. On the Labour Court matter that was heard recently and decided recently, Mr. Advocate Makobe from our side would manage that. And any matter related to the PFMA, the Acting Director General will address that. And let me see what I can help the committee with in terms of some of the questions that were asked. I think the one theme that runs through all of the questions, Chairperson, is, if you like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And in this instance, unlike the chicken and the egg, the answer is very simple. That what the business, and I'll repeat this at the end as well, just for clarity purposes. What the Act requires of the business rescue practitioners, once an entity, in this case SAA, is in business rescue, is decide whether it's rescuable. Now remember that we as a shareholder are not part of any of the two structures that are created, i.e. the creditors committee and the employees committee. Although in terms of Section 150, we are required to be consulted on various important matters. So obviously at some stage they decided this is an entity that is rescuable. Secondly, they must conduct further investigations those investigations, including any input that they might receive from consultants, in this case Alvarez and Marcel, the aviation entity or advisory firm, must then be crafted into a business rescue plan. The 5.5 billion rands is not just to run the business. The first objective is to carry on with the business, trim the business down so that you cut the cost, and the question is whether enough of that was actually done. And then, as quickly as possible, produce a business rescue plan. That plan will then say, Chairperson, firstly, what's the business model that is being recommended for a viable, competitive airline not dependent on the fiscus, retaining the optimum number of jobs? Secondly, and that would mean, are you domestic and regional, meaning the continent? Are you domestic, regional, and international? The second question is the routes. Which domestic routes are you going to fly? which regional or African continental routes are you going to fly, and which global routes are you going to fly? The third question is, if you've chosen your routes, what are the most fuel efficient and cost efficient aircraft that are needed for this particular purpose? Because we are told by experts, and I'm no aviation expert, that there's a mismatch between what we might want to fly and have been flying and the kind of aircraft that we actually have. And depending on the routes and the aircraft, you're going to choose an organizational model that would give us numbers, and they had numbers. Whether we agree with them or not is a different matter. And that should be also part of the conversation and consultation with various parties. The fourth issue is then, how many staff do you need? Now, one of the things we need to clarify in this regard, let me come back to the end. And the final issue, amongst many others, is the question of a financial model, as many colleagues have asked, that would support the new airline. Now, there would be different versions depending on the kind of legal route that you follow in order to achieve that objective, something that has not been mentioned so far. In other words, you can actually, or one can create a new airline by actually saying that you're creating an entirely new company and you're starting all over again, so to speak. And one way or the other, you try to acquire one or two or three of the important assets that the airline has, the old airline. Or restructuring means you reorganize the existing airline so something new emerges from it. So something new emerges from the old, where you do away with those things that don't contribute to a viable, competitive, cost-efficient airline, and keep those which are central to the kind of mission that you have for the new airline itself. The big qualification that has been introduced since COVID-19, Chair and members, is that any restart, and in our case, the start of a, inverted commas, new airline, will have to start at a fairly low step and then be stepped up over a 2 or 3 year period. So the number of people that you're going to need, or the number of aircraft you're going to need in the startup phase of a new airline is going to be different and smaller than what might be the case in 3 years later. And that's an important qualification as we go. In relation to the PCF and the money question, this is not about not having money. The question is, and that is an answer to several of the questions that have been raised, what do you provide money for? Is it to continue to spend as per the pie chart, or is it now spent in order to achieve the objective of achieving a rescued business? In our view, through all of this period, certainly the latter part, has been that and that's, I believe, the normal practice, that the plan must outline all the elements that I've actually indicated and say, this is what it's going to cost you. Then we can take those numbers to government and see what is government able to actually contribute, what is a strategic equity partner able to actually contribute, and can we make up the finances that are required, not for the exercise and the processes of restructuring, but more importantly for the airline to be a sustainable entity at the end of the day. So the chicken and the egg is money first or plan first. And clearly, if money is to be spent, it must be spent in, apart from the initial phases, investigation, etc., in terms of the requirements of what an acceptable plan actually provides for. So that's I thought one important point that runs through most of the questions that have been asked. So is government going to fund it, and whether it is, how much is it going to fund it, will depend on the model that is being produced, whether it is by the business rescue people or whether our own investigations contribute to that. But that number is not available. It's available in various forms. The 7.7 billion rands that is referred to is about, if you like, the restructuring process. What about the new airline itself, as some of the colleagues have been asking? So I think we need to come back to you about what would it cost to actually execute the new airline, as opposed to continue with these processes for 5 months over such an extended period. The question Mr. Lees addresses to me is one that I've answered now about the business rescue and the request for money in April. And clearly, as Mr. Lees knows from his previous experience on various committees as well, and we all know from the various budget statements that we've heard, foreign currency borrowing for anybody is a risky exercise. And the proof of the pudding is now in the current circumstances, with the volatility of foreign currencies, the exchange rate, and the kind of risks that one would be actually taking. So it is for that reason that we said you can't borrow. And if you borrow, what are you going to use it for at the end of the day? To continue with the pie chart expenditure, or start an entirely different process in order to achieve the end objective of this exercise, which is a viable airline at the end of the process? Because that's why we said that this is a rescuable business. So the question Mr. Lees asks is, if there is a business plan, will funding be made available? So I've addressed that question. Let's see what is required and how we mobilize those funds that are actually required. If I may add a bit on the repatriation, Chairperson, I think there's an interesting lesson for all of us there. Had South Africa not had the kind of aircraft that it did have with all its deficiencies, as far as the A340s are concerned and their lack of fuel efficiency, although we have the 2 A350s, which are far more fuel efficient, we would not have been able to undertake these repatriation flights. We've now been asked as a government by various foreign agencies to assist to distribute foreign assistance in the form of food, medical assistance, and so on to the Southern African region. And that's an additional responsibility that we have as well. But the business rescue practitioners are in a better position to say what happened to the funding. And the process that we had in government, before we misunderstand the role of DIRCO, is that DIRCO is the channel through which foreign governments were to approach the South African government for assistance, for the various permissions that were required, and other forms of assistance required so that they could repatriate their citizens. So, for example, one European country had 10 flights that they arranged with SAA. There might have been more subsequently, I'm not sure, to repatriate their citizens to their particular country. Mr. Kachalia asks, and of course he finds it very difficult to resist barbs, I see, in response to the picture I tried to paint in respect of COVID-19. So he says most airlines are in ICU. Most airlines are in ICU, but most airlines who want to run a serious business are asking the question, how do we survive, and how do we thrive, and how do we grow again in a post-COVID environment? And that's the same question that South African airlines are confronted with as well. Those that can't manage are shutting down, or some of them are shutting down subsidiaries or differently branded airlines, as is the case with one of the European airlines as well. Is the government going to continue to hand bailouts to SAA or its successor? Well, SAA is not operating, so there's no bailouts. And that's why we want this process, Chairperson, to be concluded sooner rather than later, and concluded in a way in which the purpose of business rescue is actually achieved, i.e., a viable business at the end of this process. And its successor, well, it depends what the requirements are and how we bring together different forms of capital to actually make it work. The questions asked by Mr. Somyo are, I think, quite important, and hopefully the business rescue practitioners are able to answer them frankly, but clearly extension after the 25-day period, as Mr. Hadebe points out as well, is not something that one takes lightly. And the absence of a plan versus the money question I've also addressed as well. Honorable Mente raises questions about the deficiencies in the plan and that we cannot support the plan. So let me point out, Chair, as you will see when we distribute the plan, that this is a draft plan. It's also an incomplete plan. So it's not about supporting the plan. We don't have a plan. What we have is one version of the plan. We've got other proposals that have been put to us as well that have different consequences for the objective that we had set and the Companies Act sets for this particular exercise. The financial questions that she raises, the board will address. And I think she asks a very appropriate question, which I must agree with. What is this 28% to others? And the evergreen contract, just to remind colleagues, is in respect of the pilots and the kind of benefits and privileges that were assigned to them on an inverted commas evergreen basis many years ago, which obviously they are in the process of talking about within the Labour Forum, and we expect a constructive outcome there. And they are one of the parties, Chair, that was willing to take a salary sacrifice as well. On the wind down question that came up, the wind down is not an alternative, and we don't consider it to be an alternative to the actual objective that the business rescue plan or rather the business rescue provisions of the Companies Act desires. Because the purpose of providing 5.5 billion rands from government was to complete a business rescue process which must end with a viable, streamlined, trimmed down, cost-effective business. And I think it is petulant, if one might say so, in order for the practitioners to actually say, and we have a matter of difference here, that you won't give us money, so we'll wind it down. Effectively, they'll do what Mr. Lees has been talking about. And I wonder sometimes, Chair, who's waiting in the wings to pick up what pieces for what price? That actually are assets that belong to the public of South Africa. But that's, I'm sure, something that we'll pick up at some stage. That I didn't support the BRP request in respect of money for the new airline. I think I've addressed that particular question. On Mr. Jakana and the various turnaround, the SAA has, as you know, Chair, many turnaround plans. So the board will address that because they had to deal with Mr. Jakana, who was accountable to them. On Mr. Hadebe's point about requisite skills, that's for the business rescue practitioners to address. And the question directed to me is, why did we keep quiet? Well, we didn't. Firstly, extensions of the 25-day period don't come to us for consent. They go to the creditors committee and the employees committee. So we might learn in a very indirect way and all assume that extensions have been granted by the fora that the Companies Act actually prescribes at this point in time. But we have had some correspondence and various engagements with the BRPs and their legal advisors that we are not happy with this endless extensions, and more importantly, that there is no business rescue plan as a consequence of 5 months of work and the amount of money and fees that have actually been earned over this particular period. And I think Mr. Hadebe is right that before a plan is finalized, there should be all forms of engagements and consultations, which is what we are doing, for example, with the labor unions. We are the ones who ran technical workshops with them to enable them to contribute towards what the future design of an airline could be, what the constraints could be, and how we manage the step up from a low-key operation to higher levels of operation if conditions of travel actually change. Chair, your point about the financials, again, the board will address the question of impairments. The question on subsidiaries, SAA has three important subsidiaries. Air Chefs, which supplies food, and what Air Chefs board has done, Chair, is to actually taper down the number of employees that are active, and of course there's hardly any activity going on at the moment. They've cut their salary costs, and they've cut various other costs in order to survive until their future is actually determined. In the case of Mango, which is the second subsidiary, soon after the lockdown, or maybe before that, the management and staff of Mango agreed to a 50% cut in salaries. Nothing of that sort happened in SAA. Mango did take the initiative, Chair, and will survive into the future depending on the kind of business plan we actually emerge with. The third important subsidiary is SAA Technical. It was also seriously impacted by corruption in the past, and it's going through its own exercise. They've also trimmed down some of their salary bill as well in order to survive. And that's a very valuable asset, as we've mentioned to you before, as far as South African government is concerned, but more importantly, B, as far as the aviation industry in South Africa is concerned. The union's going to court. As I said, Mr. Makobe will take you through the logic of that court action and what is the import of the outcome of the court judgment has been or will be. The question of the cost of a new airline, so-called, or a restructured airline, as I said, those models are now being concluded, and within the next few weeks or days, we will actually, beg your pardon, let me correct that. Within the next few weeks, we will have a more certain figure in terms of what that would take, and then various engagements will take place within government and outside of government as well. So with your consent, may I ask Mr. Makobe to address the legal question? The Acting Director General might want to address some PFMA questions, and then the board chair can address some of the issues I've referred to them. And of course, the business rescue practitioners have a whole lot of questions to address themselves. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Minister. Let's do this. Let's get the business rescue practitioners to come in now, and then we will continue in the sequence which has been outlined. So to the joint business practitioners, if you can then provide the responses to the questions, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'll try and address the bulk of the questions, and then the remainder, then Mr. Les Matuson, my joint business practitioner, would address the remainder of the questions. Starting with Honorable Lees, I think the issue of the wind down, the Section 128 1B2 of the Act does address the issue of what in the industry we now refer to as a winding down, because in Section 128 1B3 it says it talks about the development and implementation of a plan to rescue the company by restructuring its affairs, business, property, debt and other liabilities, and equity in a manner that maximizes the likelihood of the company continuing in existence on a solvent basis. It then goes on to say, if it is not possible for the company to do so, to continue in existence, result in a better return for the company's creditors or shareholders than would result from the immediate liquidation of the company. And which means it's a process of actually winding down the company in a structured way and realize the assets of the company for the benefit of the shareholder or creditors in a way that is much better than would be in the case of a liquidation, which is generally accepted that assets sold under a liquidation, they lose value significantly. the issue around the salaries were paid for all employees of SAA for April, and I think we can provide the detail, Honorable Chair, of the different splits in terms of to address Honorable Lisa's question about what percentage was paid to flight crew. We are up to date with all taxes to SARS, and we can confirm that in writing. The 2 billion rand that we received initially, it is going to be paid in as was indicated in the budget in terms of the medium-term MTF, and so as things stand, it has not yet been paid. The flights, the repatriation of flights, all the flights are paid for by the foreign governments, as the Honorable Minister has indicated. They work through DECO, but all the flights are paid for by the various foreign governments for the repatriation of their citizens to their countries. And then flights coming back for the repatriation of South Africans, the flights are paid for by the passengers, but the charge is minimum, and SAA is not making any excessive profits from the repatriation of flights because it is viewed as a humanitarian mission. On the issue, Honorable Kachalia, whether should we liquidate the business, I think in answering the issue of a wind down, our view is that in the absence of funding, the best way forward is not to liquidate, but it is run a structured wind down. And the draft business plan that the minister was alluding to is anticipating or contemplating a winding down process. The Honorable Somyo, the issue about the extensions, yes, indeed, we have requested extensions. I think maybe it is important for us to state that it is not so much that we as business practitioners, we are requiring that the money for the restructuring be provided to the company, all of it at the beginning. But what I think is important is for us to have a commitment of whether or not the restructuring will be funded, because that enables the development of a plan to be in the context of a very specific budget. It also enables us in putting the plan to creditors for approval to be able to answer some specific questions. For example, how are we going to deal with the dividend to creditors, if at all? Secondly, in the plan itself, there is a requirement in the Companies Act that we put projections for at least the next 3 years with a focused balance sheet and income statement. It becomes important in us in developing those forecasts and having those numbers in the business rescue plan that they are at least underpinned by a commitment to what funding do we have in order for us to make those forecasts and projections. And more importantly, to be able to answer the question that what needs to happen and at what time are we then in a position to say the business rescue is substantially implemented and therefore the company can exit a business rescue. And so to the extent then that we do not have a committed amount that supports the business rescue and the restructuring of a company, it becomes difficult to do that. And I guess we accept and receive the concerns raised by the members. And I think it is for us as a business rescue practitioners to look into how we respond adequately to this issue. Honorable Mente, the issue of the 28% other, the pie chart was simply a summary of the preceding slide which showed the waterfall of the payments, and it outlines in detail all the various categories of payments, and we simply, for ease of reference, summarize them in that pie chart and put the 8% as part of other. The issue around the skills in aviation, Alvarez and Marsal, our international experts, do have aviation experience, and we're dependent on them around that. The minister correctly indicated that the extensions were granted on the basis of the consent by creditors and not necessarily by the shareholder. The Chair, the issue of engagements and the extent of engagements, the Companies Act provides that there is an employee committee as well as a creditors committee. The employee committee at SAA is represented, has representatives rather, from all the unions of SAA. Further, it also has representatives from all non-unionized management and non-management staff. That committee, they elected themselves a chairperson for the committee, Mr. Klute Marais, who is also a business rescue practitioner and understands the process of business rescue. And engagements that happen in that committee are also indicated in the Companies Act, that in the main, we have to provide an update to that committee on the process, on the progress of the business rescue, as well as consult on a business rescue plan. And the issue of the Section 189 court case, I'll leave it to Mr. Makove, maybe to provide the view of the department on that case. But I think important for us is that it is important that the Section 189 process that we undertook was the unions and non-unionized management, with the exception of 2 unions, participated in that Section 189 process, and it was done under the auspices of the CCMA, and I would end it there. And Les, if you've got any further comments.
Which one union? Which are the 2 unions participate?
It's NUMSA and SACA.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, on the issue of the various contracts, yes, the issue of the various contracts and the investigation in terms of Section 141, we have the SIU has been involved in SA and continues to be involved. We have provided them with all the contracts that we also believe, coming out of our own process, to be problematic or that are flagged as risky. We've provided them to the SIU, and we continue to provide them on an ongoing basis as and when we identify issues, because if you go back to my slides where we were talking about the value for money process, one of the things that is important in driving the value for money process is, one, prior to us making any payments, it is important that we understand that there is a valid contract in place, that the contract has been signed, that the contract complies with the various prescripts, including the PFMA, and then we look at the commercial terms of the contracts to assess whether or not the commercial terms of the contract make sense. And if the commercial terms don't make sense, that is when we then renegotiate the contracts or pursue for a cancellation. But if we deem that the commercial terms are also excessive, we then pass those contracts to the SIU for further investigation. And we would be more than happy to provide to the committee the detail of all the contracts that we have looked at and the list thereof.
All right. I'm trying to also manage isikhathi. Babu Dongwane, are you done?
Mr. Matheson wants to make a comment.
All right. Mr. Matheson, over to you. Thank you, Babu Dongwane.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to pick up on where we were left off with regards to the liquidation in particular. I'll also address some of the issues which Honourable Member Kachalia raised. But before I jump into liquidations, I'd like to say a few words about where we are and how we see things. Well, the reality is that Minister Gordhan, against the backdrop of SAA's financial difficulties, had a vision of building something new and sustainable, and he has stood firm even as the coronavirus pandemic engulfed the world. The pandemic has devastated economies and brought global air travel to a near standstill. In spite of these difficulties, the Minister's objective of ensuring a constructive outcome for SAA has remained consistent throughout the business rescue process. The start of the business rescue process, no one could have predicted or even anticipated the sweeping changes that were about to irrevocably alter the aviation industry as we once knew it. In light of the uncertainties ahead, Minister Gordhan has held firm to the goal of creating a sustainable new airline. The Minister has been consistent throughout the process in the goal of replacing SAA with a restructured new national airline which is fiscally independent. His vision encompasses a carrier that is internationally competitive, sustainable, profitable, and a real catalyst for economic growth and future job creation. Just a short while ago, Alexandre de Juniac, Director General and CEO of IATA, highlighted the centrality of airlines as key to the travel and tourism value chain. In relation to Africa, he warned that in the absence of vital funding to sustain the sector, especially in the wake of the economic catastrophe of COVID-19, the continent's development could be retarded by a decade, possibly even more. Sorry, excuse me. The backing of significant stakeholders such as Labour, it's groundbreaking. The Minister is not intimidated by the tasks ahead. The first of these will undoubtedly be securing equity partners and investors to fulfill his ambition of a fiscus-independent entity. Whilst the Minister is fully cognizant of the turmoil which has beset airlines such as Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Australia, Singapore Airlines, Etihad Airways.
Bob Matheson, I'm going to request you that let's go to the questions for the purposes of time management. Okay. I'm sure we can discuss the minister's competence or otherwise at a later stage. Let's hold a referendum on his capabilities. Let us, and I think the picture around COVID has been vividly painted.
I agree.
I think let's go to the responses because there's still another round of questions because there are other colleagues. Yeah. All right.
Can I just finish off just one or two paragraphs? I'll be quick, and then I'm jumping into the liquidation side, which Minister Kachalia wanted me to do. I was going to say that if Minister Gordhan can succeed in the goal of restructuring and rebuilding a national carrier from the remnants of what once was, he will have achieved much to aid South Africa's re-emergence from the shadow the pandemic has cast over the economy of the entire continent. We, Saviwe and myself, have been engaging with the DPE and are committed to assisting them with achieving their desired outcome. With regards to liquidation, Member Kachalia, I just want to say that the liquidation process is a very, very destructive one. And if you had to compare the business rescue versus the liquidation from a Labour perspective as a stakeholder, an important one, is a much better return because the statutory preference for Labour on retrenchments in a liquidation is capped at 32,000 Rand. In a BR, you get a full retrenchment. And liquidation generally just sows chaos. Obviously, the company would lose the AOCs, probably the slots and various licenses. And the Pricewaterhouse liquidation calc showed a dividend for concurrence as being very close to zero. In fact, maybe even a contribution account and we are reasonably confident that in business rescue, their return would be better. And I think, as it's been explained, there's two types of business rescues, a Part A and a Part B. And in a Part B, if the result is a better result than would have accrued to stakeholders in a liquidation, that is, in terms of the definition, a successful business rescue. I think the reality is that in a liquidation, basically, the whole staff complement would be unemployed, and it's got a lot of implications. I think also it's important for those of you...
Sorry to interrupt, Chairperson. Sorry to interrupt, Chairperson. Can you please ask the presenter to turn on his camera? We'd like to see who's doing this presentation currently. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Unfortunately, my camera don't work. In fact, I'm lucky that the computer's working full stop. So I apologize, but please believe me, I have a face for the radio, not for the camera. And I apologize that the camera's not working.
Is this symptomatic of SAA?
No.
Please proceed. Let's manage time. Proceed.
Okay. So I was going to say that in a liquidation, start to finish could go for 2 to 3 years. It's a long, arduous process, and there can be no dividends paid, not to staff, not to concurrent creditors, not to preferred creditors, until such time as the liquidation is complete and the account is laid for inspection and has been confirmed by the Master of the Supreme Court. Otherwise, there's no funds that can flow unless it's a secured creditor and their security is being realized. I think that liquidation would probably have quite serious consequences for, I don't know whether government guarantees would be called, cross defaults. I think that there's no question of doubt in my mind that a liquidation process would materially erode value, and the net recoveries for creditors could be an absolute disaster. And like I said, there are no distributions until the account has been confirmed, and that could take 2 to 3 years. And we would not recommend a liquidation in a hurry to anybody. I don't know if there's any other questions that you'd like me to tackle.
Right, as you weave through those, members will note if there's a matter which has not been responded to. I will give those members a chance. Honorable Deputy Minister, there was questions on SA Express. Let us hand over to you, and hopefully your connection this time round is better. And also ask you to turn on your screen. But I think...
Maybe switch it off, Minister.
Honorable Deputy Minister.
Okay, the Deputy Minister seems to be offline, but I'll just deal quickly with the two questions that has been raised. Number one, on what basis will you oppose the liquidation of SA Express? I must mention that the reason why the business rescue practitioners applied to court to convert the business rescue into liquidation was because there was no post-commencement finance that they could find. Now, for any party to oppose the provisional liquidation order.
Hello? But who's speaking?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but who are you?
It's like they can't hear. Can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you, but who are you? All right.
Okay.
Ben, please mute that speaker so that we can know who they are, because I'm not sure that the Deputy Minister's got a stand-in. Because there's no Deputy Minister.
Okay, I'm the Deputy Director General in the department, and the Deputy Minister is off now. That's why I wanted to address that question before I get into the Labour Court judgment issue.
Let's rather treat the issues which are in your purview, because with the deputy minister it started off and yet connection problems. If as political principal is not around, the minister is here, whom he deputizes. Let's rather do that. So you can go to the labor matters.
Okay. On the labor court judgment, the court action emanates from the provisions of Section 136 of the Companies Act.
Please turn on your camera if you are on the floor.
Yes, my camera is on.
No.
Not sure whether you can see me now.
No.
But my camera is on. From my screen, I can see myself. Can I proceed,
I can
Chair?
see him, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
The court action emanates from the provisions of Section 136 of the Companies Act that anticipates that the business rescue plan must be developed before any retrenchment in terms of Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act can proceed. If I quote it, it says any retrenchment of the employees contemplated in the company's business rescue plan is subject to Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act. Now, what the business rescue practitioners wanted to do was to proceed with the retrenchment process by issuing Section 189 notices without the business rescue plan. Now, the court ordered that the BRPs must present a business rescue plan before beginning a retrenchment process, effectively saying the notices that they have issued are procedurally unfair. They were further ordered to withdraw the notices that they were issued in terms of Section 189. However, the court proceeded to say that the BRPs can offer any employees, and the employees can accept any voluntary severance package. So the synopsis of it, Chair, is that the court has pronounced on the matter to say that before any retrenchment process can begin, there has to be a business rescue plan in place. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Minister, in your delegation, has everybody responded, or there's...
The Director General might want to add one or two things. Yeah.
All right, let's give the Director General, and so then, right, DG?
Thank you very much, Chair. What I wanted to respond to, Chair, because the issue here has revolved around funding and the request for PCF. As an accounting authority, Chair, I have a responsibility in line with the Public Finance Management Act to ensure that we have an effective, efficient, and economical and transparent use of resources that are allocated to the department, and by extension to the entities. And of course, I have a responsibility to ensure that when these funds are transferred to the entities, that they are managed in accordance with the provisions of the Act. And as we report back through the Minister to Parliament, Chair, as you're aware, we have to report back as well on the status of our entities financially. And Chair, of course, in doing so, ensure that any irregular and wasteful expenditure is minimized. Chair, the request from the rescue practitioners has had to be scrutinized in a similar way. And on numerous occasions, Chair, we have requested the business rescue practitioners to provide us with information on how the funds are being utilized. Also, what kind of actions are they taking to ensure that there is no wasteful, or rather the weak controls that have led to increased wasteful expenditure at the entity are addressed. For instance, the business rescue practitioner referred to onerous contracts. We are still waiting for that information as the department, Chair, as to contracts that have been cancelled. And of course, as it was raised, Chair, by yourself, whether there are grounds for action to be taken, whether such action has been taken. Chair, the one other matter I want to raise is the return of aircraft back to the lessors. Chair, if that had been acted on promptly during this lockdown period, we'd have been able to save almost 100 million rands a month in maintenance costs. And in the last week or so, we have had to plead with the business rescue practitioner to say those aircraft must be returned. And Chair, on the issue of the restructuring cost, which has been reported here as 7.7 billion rands, this figure, Chair, has been a moving target. In February, we were presented with a 9.9 billion rands, which we said we cannot support that figure. We went back to the original figure that they had come up with, the rescue practitioner, which was 7.1 billion rands. And we provided them with additional 1.5 billion rands to fund operating costs up to the end of the financial year. So, Chair, that's where we are coming from. We are saying that the business rescue practitioners need to be able to justify to the department where any request for funding, how it will be spent, and what will be the product that will be produced, so that in turn we are able to come and report and account to Parliament. Chair, thank you so much.
All right, DG, before you go, you had started off on the SA Express matters. Can you respond to those questions in the absence of the Deputy Minister?
I'm back, Chair.
Oh, okay, perfect. Right, DM, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair.
DM, before you proceed, I wanted to say, because I think the circumstances as SA Express are concerning. One employee has sent a message to me and they say, we have not been paid since March. And goes on to say, we are even now begging for food parcels everywhere. So I add on to the questions that have been asked, and for that to move with urgency to provide certainty for employees. So right, over to you, DM.
No, thank you very much, Chair. My apologies again. My network was a bit sloppy here. To respond to Honourable Lisa's question, we have checked and rechecked. The position he states with such authority doesn't seem to have emanated from the department. We have taken no such a position as the department. Even the ministry is not aware of that. So it could be that Honourable Lisa could help us to say, where did he come across that? Safe to say that presently there is a provisional liquidation order to which the court has invited or is awaiting any of the affected parties to seek either a review of that, to approach court before the 9th of June for such. To the extent we are having discussions with the appointed liquidators, we haven't arrived at any position to seek to have that position revoked. So I could leave it at that. Regarding the second matter, which the Honourable Chair is raising, we are very, very sympathetic to the plight of the employees, particularly the issues of not getting paid their salaries. To this effect, we have engaged the UIF to the extent of the applicable policies. They've been able to make interventions, albeit not adequate. We are still engaging in that regard, but certainly the developments on the side in respect of the imminent liquidation might in some sense provide some finality to the matter, but we are very sympathetic to it. Thank you very much, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Hello.
Chair, there were questions that the Minister requested the board to respond to.
I was coming to you, so you can proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. There were a few questions on the finances by the member Mente, on operational costs, what has been done, and the 40 billion accumulated figure, as well as the renegotiations, refinances, and what are the specific line items. The chairman then requested information regarding the impairments that have contributed to the loss. Because the board has not received any financial report from the BRPs, I will ask Dion to deal with those, and where there are historical questions with respect to the finances, then Dion and Agda can deal with those. There was also a question on the many turnaround strategies that had been put on the table by SAA. Indeed, when the BR process started, the board at the time had been working on an accelerated turnaround plan, ensuring that the transformation and the restructuring of the airline was happening. I cannot say whether the BRPs took some of the work that had been done into consideration when the BRP process started. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. May I hand over to Dion and where necessary, Agda as well.
Now, on the issue of the finances, let's hold that so that because I'm trying to watch time so that we can probably at a later stage we will have a far more meaningful and in-depth discussion about the finances. Otherwise, Maswaka Pezul, we may run the risk of not doing justice to them. So since they were my questions, I will suspend them for now. But just please do note them, or maybe in the written submissions that we'll request, you can then bring them in. All right, colleagues, I'm going to be, as you know, sometimes I employ a democratic dictatorship. So I'm going to ask members to be very brief in this regard. In the questions, I've got 4 hands and 1 follow-up. So I'll ask you to be very, very brief so that we can manage our time. I know there are a lot of issues, but at the same time, our circumstances, have made it very difficult for us to engage in the manner in which we ordinarily do. So I crave your indulgence and understanding in that regard. Honorable Dex, you are first off the bat, and then Honorable Maotwe, Honorable Van Minen, Honorable Swart, and then Honorable Hatebe, you will then have your follow-up. Right, over to you, colleagues. Very briefly, please.
Yeah.
Please note my hand.
Thank you.
Please note my hand.
Thank you, Comrade Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Comrade Chair. I'll be very, very brief. But before I ask my question, I just want some clarity. I did not hear the business rescue practitioner clearly when he was answering Honorable Hatebe's question regarding whether any of the business practitioners have aviation experience. I think the question is directed directly to the practitioners, not partners of the practitioners or consultants of the practitioners, but directly to the practitioners, the 3 or how many ever they are. Do any of them have any aviation experience? And that's a question I want some clarity on. I didn't hear it properly. Then I'll just confine myself very briefly to the issue of cost-cutting measures, because as we all aware that the business practitioners, one of the tasks of the business practitioner is to implement cost-cutting measures. Now, the DG responded to a question that I was going to ask regarding the cost-cutting measures. Firstly, I want to find out from the business practitioner, they must outline to us clearly all the cost-cutting saving measures that they have put in place since they took over the airliner. They must outline to us all the cost-cutting measures, starting right from the issue of the leased aircraft. Because we know that the SAA aircrafts are leased, and COVID-19 kicked in, aircraft was grounded. I want to know whether that was one of the cost-cutting measures. Have they returned those aircrafts? If not, why have they not returned it? Because as I heard from the DG, it was going to be a saving of about 100 million. That's the first one. The second one that I want to know from them is the evergreen contract of the pilots, which is a huge cost to the airliner. Have they dealt with the issue of the evergreen contracts of pilots? Have they cancelled those contracts? If not, why not? Then lastly, what I want to know is I actually want to know the actual cost of the business practitioner itself. How much is Mr. Dongwana's fees for the last 4 months that he's been there? What is the fees, the amount of the fees? And also I want to know how much has how much is the fees of the business practitioner itself for the last 5 months that they've been at the airliner. But they must outline to us all the cost-saving measures that they've implemented since taking over the airliner. Thank you, Chairperson.
All right, no, that's fine. I think let's broaden that scope. It's the cost of each of the business rescue practitioners. So it's both of them, just one question. All right. Honorable Maotwe, I hope I have not butchered your surname.
No, you have not. Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening to the colleagues. I think it's very clear that BRP, they are not taking this thing very serious, and they're not taking the shareholder very serious. We can't have a DG presenting here and telling us that the BRP is failing to give to account for the monies they've spent. So my proposal, Chair, without even going into detail, I had a number of questions to ask BRP, but it's pointless because we're dealing with people who don't want to be held accountable. My proposal is that they must resign with immediate effect. If they don't, then I'm personally going to lobby my organization that we approach the court to remove them. We can't have BRP that are paying themselves salaries. We don't know how much they're paying. And when they are being asked, how much are you spending for your own salaries? How much have you recouped from this evergreen contracts? We can't get that. So that's one. And the second thing is that when I'm listening to them speaking, I think they've overstepped their mandate. I think they've gone beyond what is required of them. They are acting as liquidators and they are BRPs. Their central role is to rehabilitate the company, not to wind it down. Once you start the process of winding down, then you've overstepped because you are not taking the role of a liquidator. And you can't be a BRP and a liquidator at the same time. So I think that this committee must go and seek legal guidance to clarify whether the BRP can actually liquidate, because they can't be starting the process of winding down. Now the last one, Chair, is that we've got a number of SOEs that have not been performing well financially and otherwise. We've got SABC that was on the verge of collapsing. We've had Petro SA. We've had the Land Bank as well, and none of the ministers came to any portfolio committee and said the only solution is to come up with a new restructuring organization or anything like that. So I think Minister Godan must be clear and be honest with us. What exactly are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with Minister Godan, who is reminding us that he played a central role in fundraising for CR17? And when he was busy collecting this money from funders, was he not promising them that he's going to privatize our SOEs? How is it that it is only him and his SOEs that are being threatened with being privatized? We've got SABC today that has turned around and is now flying because of the leadership that is currently deployed to SABC. Why can't we have the minister who comes here and gives us confidence that he's doing everything in his power to rescue this national asset? I think we must be told the truth here, Chairperson. And I'm going to end it here for now. Thank you.
All right. I'm sure the minister is capable of responding for himself, but from the chair, I must caution that this remains a parliamentary meeting and we are guided by parliamentary rules. The minister, being a member of the House, is protected by those rules. I will not enter into the merits or demerits of the allegations made. However, such aspersions must be in a substantiated motion to the House. So I just want to lay that out. The minister is capable of responding for himself, but at the same time, I must maintain the the rules of the House and the committee in this meeting. Right, Honourable Van Minen.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a question for the Minister. We know that national carriers are notoriously unprofitable, and currently there are many of the existing ones that are facing huge challenges internationally. We're also seeing the largest shareholders dumping airline shares as they don't see any future in airlines in the foreseeable post-COVID space. So my question is, why are we currently giving such consideration to starting a new airline? How will it differ to the current situation with SAA with its many, many turnaround plans? How can this course of action even be considered in the current airspace environment? And given the pronouncements of Mr. Mattison, I'm very concerned that this entire process has been aimed at the launch of a new airline all along, and this casts grave doubts on the entire 5-month process. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Honourable Swartz.
Thank you, Chair.
There you are, Dennis. All right,
Thank
over
you,
to
Chair.
you.
Chair, I know our time is very limited, but I just want to raise a few issues, Chair. From our last meeting, 25 days, they had to have a rescue plan. 5 months later, there is nothing. Today, on the day of the committee meeting, we get given a draft plan. The second item on their draft plan is us having to listen, the business rescue team and the department at each other's heads at loggerheads. Chair, my take is that the business rescue team is on an escape plan. They are escaping now, this business rescue team. They never had an intention of rescuing South African Airways at all. Because today when they give us their finances, they're not telling us how much they are paying themselves, how much they are paying the consultants, how much the lawyers have paid themselves from the 5.5 billion, excluding the 2 billion that they were given by the bank. So the business rescue team cannot sit here today and tell us what they are telling us when they are only giving us their plan today that gets emailed to us during our sitting. So they never had intentions of rescuing anything. Secondly, Chair, the fact that they even opposed a court order when they were taken to court by the labor unions also shows that their intentions is around themselves making money out of the budget that is there, that is meant to actually save the airline, because they are not being honest today when they are giving us their finances. And I also want to know if there are any minutes between the business rescue team, the board and shareholders, because in this instance, the rescue team holds the powers, but the act requires them to interact with the board and the shareholders, even though they are the ones that hold the power. In all the decisions that the rescue team has taken up to thus far, how many meetings did they have with the board members and the shareholders to show their intentions of actually rescuing the airline? Which also includes how many meetings did they have with the unions to show us that they have been interacting with each other? And also, Chair, if Treasury had not removed the exemption from this rescue team, by the way they have set out their project plan today and already talking about winding down, I'm very sure that they would have sold the assets of South African Airways had Treasury not removed their exemption as a business rescue team. Thank you, Chair.
All right. I did. Thanks, Honourable Swartz. Those were all new questions, members who had not spoken. Colleagues, because you've indicated in our group and by my democratic dictatorship, which you allow, we will have 1 minute follow-ups. So, Honourable Kachalia, 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. There's been much talk about assets and skills. And now that the chips are down, of course, assets will fetch whatever the market or circumstances dictate. The question is, will the minister allow the private sector to step in instead of floating a new public sector failure, potential failure? Will he allow the private sector to step in and pick up these assets and have a shot at fixing the market failure of the public sector over many years? A cautious intervention that will build an aviation offering based on supply and demand that makes use of assets and valuable skills. No one's throwing these away. And that will give the fiscus and the taxpayer a very welcome break in this regard. I'd appreciate an answer. Thank you.
Honorable Somyo, 1 minute.
Thanks, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Proceed.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Having had the rescue practitioners on a number of expenses that have been experienced so far, and as well, harping on the question which Honorable Hadebe has asked in terms of the absence of the skill which is required on aviation, which has been sourced outside away from them, that has been at a cost. At what cost was it sourced, and at what product? Which end product can we basically say that we have enjoyed out of that engagement of such a skill, if indeed it was somewhat made? And with the minister, how far are we in terms of the development of aviation strategy, which could be part of the sustenance proof of what South Africa seek to benefit from in terms of its own skies, accessibility, and sustainability of the new airline? Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, Honorable Hadebe, 1 minute.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'm going to repeat my question that was not answered. I have asked whether or not the business rescue practitioner, have they tabled a business rescue plan as per section 151, 152, and 153? If not, when are they planning to table such a plan? 5 months into their appointment, no plan has been published. Do they honestly think they are the suitable partners into conducting this mammoth task of rescuing SAA? Chair, I'm raising this question precisely because of what the DG has alluded to, that they were unable to demonstrate or indicate how their funds are going to be utilized. Bearing in mind, Chair, that the business rescue practitioner is an accounting authority as per section 49, subsection 2, subsection B of the PFMA. Now, if you have an accounting authority that is unable to account on how funds are going to be used, are they suitable for the job? If not, can they please do an honorable thing and save us billions of rand? Thank you.
All right, Honorable Liz, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid the business rescue practitioners failed to answer my initial question. Siviwe obfuscates and refers to section 128, but section 141 is very, very clear. If at any time during the business rescue proceedings, the practitioner concludes there is no reasonable prospect for the company to be rescued, the practitioner must apply to the court for an order to end the business rescue and apply for liquidation. And so my question, Mr. Chairman, was, if there is no funding made available from the state and they cannot find any other sources of funding, can SAA be rescued? A simple question, yes or no. After 5 months, they surely can answer that simple question. And if the answer is no, why have they not applied for liquidation, as section 41 requires? Mr. Chairman, and I'm also somewhat surprised that I, as an outsider, have information that indicates that the flight crews of both Mango and SAA have not been paid a salary from the 1st of April, that they have been put on unpaid leave. And yet Siviwe says to me he doesn't seem to know. and that management of the airlines have been paid 50% of their salaries. I don't know about the rest of the staff, and I assume that the rest of the staff have some proportion being paid. I'm just a bit, I don't know who to believe here. I'm getting reports that say that the flight crews have been put onto unpaid leave, but the business rescue practitioners don't apparently know that, or my information is inaccurate, and I would seriously doubt that. And I would really ask them to answer that question.
Right.
And Mr. Chairman,
we had agreed on a minute.
Mr. Chairman, I don't take a lot of time. I really don't. Mr. Chairman, then the last thing then, let's do this. Can we please, in terms of section 132 of the Act, the BRPs are required to do monthly reports from the fourth month. I think it is so. They should have done March and April reports. Can they please send those copies of those reports to the committee? Thank you very much.
Right, Honourable Mente, you the last one on a follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, now it's clear that the minister, his refusal for the for the bailout was on the basis that there was no plan. And there was no plan after 5 months. And I think all of us, we know what that means. It's incapacity. And we shouldn't spend much more time talking to people who have no capacity to produce a viable plan to turn around SAA. Now, I do not see why we should wait, because if this is still a draft that waits for some polishing and some inputs from here and there, it might take another 5 months for it to be finalized. Yet then the bottom line is, how much do we need to save SAA? Then the minister will be able to answer us as to, does he have that money to save SAA? Because if he has money for a plan of establishing a new airline, it means we can save SAA and put proper measures in place. The last one is also the fact that we do not have financials for 2019 that then inform us of the accumulated figure in terms of expenditures versus the operational cost. It's a big problem. We cannot account in these terms of charts and this thing of other and everything when we account for money spent. Yet on the financials to be audited, it's not reflecting. When you want to bring figures and play around with figures, you must know you are playing around with figures with people that can read figures. What this pie chart and the explanation on the presentation says to us, it does not say the same thing on the audited financial statements. And that is very problematic. You cannot throw around money and expect us to accept that you are accounting. That's not accountability. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks, colleagues. We do not have much time. So can I request that all the responses are succinct? Colleagues, I'm sure Sitombi and Budben are noting the questions as well. We will send through where there is a need to the department, the entity, and the entity follow the follow-ups, and I will give in the summary of the roadmap, which we shall follow. Then we will go that way. So can I really ask that we be brief, please? We do not have much time left on here. Minister, over to you.
The BRPs can conclude, and then I will finish off, Chair, to help you.
Okay. Business rescue practitioners.
We are going to accelerate the production of the business rescue plan as soon as we have the business plan and work at a proper pace. And your comments are noted and accepted. Thank you.
Honorable Chair.
Just hold on, I'm waiting
Where's
for
the
the
answer to my question?
Chair, we need
hold
data.
on. Oh,
We need
wait,
data.
wait. Mazambane and Piggy, wait, hold on.
Ngiyaxolisa.
Babu Tongwane, I'm waiting for the other response, then I will make an intervention. Right? The other business rescue practitioner. Hello?
I think you're on mute, Sadiwe.
Honorable Chair. Sorry, I was on mute. Apologies. I think Honorable Dex raised the issue of aviation experience by the practitioners that was raised by Honorable Hadebe. And neither myself nor Les have previously done a rescue of an airline. If we were to recall that SAA was the first airline in this country to be put into business rescue, which is why we had, as part of our support, Alvarez and Masal, who have the aviation experience. On the issue, a very important issue about the evergreen contracts, and particularly the regulating agreement of the pilots. The Section 189 that we initiated had its two objectives. One, that there would be a headcount reduction, and secondly, there would be a revision of terms and conditions of employment for all staff, and that included dealing adequately with the issue of the regulating agreement. Now that process had been rather put into suspension by the court case. The fees of the BRPs, myself and Mr. Matuson, our rate is regulated by the CIPC, our hourly rate. However, the fees for the rest of the team would be more than happy to provide to the committee in writing for the duration of the business rescue process, including the fees of all the advisors. The issue around why the planes were not returned, it's important that we remember that at the beginning of March, we returned some planes. However, COVID kicked in, and there was a lockdown and a ban on international travel and flying. So as a consequence of that, we're not in a position to return planes. But more importantly, I think associated with the issues of aircraft are 2 points that are very important for us to raise. One, the aircraft leases are supported by letters of credit which are guaranteed by government. And so the issue of returning aircraft cannot just be done in a reckless manner, because it may result in the guarantees being called on government. So we have to manage that process very, 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 very properly. The second thing linked to that is that, to the extent that the aircraft are retained in a manner that is not in line with the contracts that we have signed with the various lessors, there would be further additional claims against SAA, and that would increase the amount of claims that SAA has in favor of creditors. And the last point, that we do have legal obligations in terms of those agreements around how we maintain some of those planes whilst they are within our possession. And linked to that, I think it's also important that we highlight that we do provide regular reports to the department, particularly two reports. One, we provide to the department a 13-week rolling cash flow forecast on a bi-weekly basis. In addition, we provide to the department a daily liquidity report which demonstrates and shows how much cash the airline has got, what expenses have been paid on a daily basis, over and above all the other engagements that we continue to have with the department, and provide information as necessary. So I think that is very important for us to put it on record that we do provide information to the department when we are requested to do so. And I will also ask that the CFO, Dion, confirm that monthly management accounts continue to be provided to DPE as well as to National Treasury. The issue of the business rescue plan, as Les has said, we are intending to have a business rescue plan for a wind down as things stand, and we will be publishing that business rescue plan soon after. Obviously, we have had engagements with affected parties and key stakeholders. Honorable Liz, Section 141 around the reasonable prospects of rescue. Indeed, we are correct, but it is important to also note that a winding down would yield a better return to creditors and shareholders, as Mr. Mattison adequately highlighted at the beginning of his address, the implications of liquidation and the erosion of value that is associated with it. On the issue of the salaries, 1st of May, I think I need to point out, Honorable Liz, that April salaries were paid for SAA. From the 1st of May, however, because of the lockdown and the absence of our inability to have people working, everyone is on unpaid absence, and the company does not, as things stand, have the funds to pay salaries for May. Yeah, I think that would be those issues, Chair. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, I know you're going to say your questions have not been answered, and I will agree with you. Time is against us. So if I may provide this summary, and then the minister will conclude and immediately say off the bat that obviously we still need further interaction and engagement with the business rescue practitioners, because the more they provide answers, the more questions arise. It's a case of classical musical chairs. It's what has characterized the operations over the past 5 months. It is what has landed us with the 10 billion rand bill, and it is, the draft report plan has been submitted and circulated to members. I've noted your comments, colleagues, when you say that receiving it now does not do us justice to interact with it. So for now, we merely note it and we'll peruse it, study it, engage it, interrogate it, and then have to interact with the business practitioners, rescue practitioners, even further. I think that Sisdombi and Budben this weekend, let's work on the questions that have not been answered and send them through to the department and the entity on Monday. And colleagues, I would request that you do the same. Send the questions to myself and to our support staff, and we will compile a comprehensive schedule of questions, and hopefully we will receive and give the department and entity a week to respond. So those responses will be due on the 26th of May, so that we satisfy ourselves. On the issue of SA Express, obviously we have not interrogated it, and we do have to meet with the liquidator, and so we will probably schedule a meeting for that within the next 14 days. We will look at Parliament's platform so that we can deal with that. I don't think it's their discretion to say they will come to Parliament or not, for whatever reasons that they may cite. And that on their part was irregular and is something that should not happen again. Should have been a determination that we would have made here, not for them to make that. So we will schedule that particular meeting with on the SA Express matters. I do want to say we still want a full schedule of accounts of fees of the business risk practitioners and their consultants, so that we can have a sense of what this incompleteness of work has cost us. This inability to meet deadlines, this shifting of goalposts, which is totally unacceptable, one might add, because this needs to be brought to finality. The SAA headache cannot continue to be a permanent feature of the South African discourse. And let us be able to take the tough decisions where they need to be taken. But let's not dilly-dally seeking some sort of correctness. And so, like I said earlier on, we take a very dim view to not being committed to your own commitments. I just want to look at my notes. That having been said, we would like to get a date as to when the business risk plan is going to be finalized. It can't be open-ended. We will consider it as a committee, and if it means that we must make a determination for you, then we will do so. But let it not come to that. I think that there needs to be a meeting of minds and arrive at a logical, functional, sustainable conclusion to what is happening. There's too many generalizations and too many theories which characterize this, bringing about uncertainty already in an uncertain environment which first prevails. So we would want that particular issue raised. Moreover, we want those cost-cutting measures that you are speaking about. We need to interact further with the Department of Public Enterprises so that we can be able to have an appreciation as to whether things are being done correctly. Consequence management. I think all of us agree. An airline such as SAA cannot just collapse. It cannot just crash and there's no consequences and nothing happens. It's as if nothing happened. We woke up one morning and SAA had crashed. No, we need to do the age analysis of this calamity so that consequences can actually be effected. So we will, of course, look at all those matters and provide a comprehensive schedule, and colleagues really implore you to have a working weekend and submit those to us. Minister, before I hand over to you, and you can then have your concluding remarks, and then we'll bring it to the end. Robert Burns writes in Ode to a Mouse, he says, "But mouse, you are not alone. In proving foresight may be vain. The base-laid schemes of mice and men go often askew and leave us nothing but grief and pain for promised joy." I hope all of us, particularly those involved in the intricate operations of this process, will reflect on those words so that we can be able to sort out this disaster which has befallen SAA. Minister, I'll hand over to you, and we will then bring the meeting to a close.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the poetry. I think we need a bit more of that to get some wisdom circulating amongst us. I'll quickly respond to some of the questions that were not addressed. In terms of returning the aircraft, although Mr. Dongwana addressed that question, he raised all the complications, but the rest of the world is actually doing it. And we haven't heard of these complications before, so I must place that on record. As far as the fees question is concerned, we did get an account when we asked for it, but this is some time ago, but a total of 30 million rands, say over 4 months, 3.5 months, was shared between the two business rescue practitioners. I'm sure they have a more updated account. And the hourly rate in the legislation is no reflection of what eventually the teams that are involved actually get shared. So there's the principles of business rescue, if you like, as practitioners, but they each come with teams that are assigned in different places. Then Honorable Matwe makes a point about overstepping the mandate. I think that's something to reflect upon. Honorable Van Menen, I think dumping of shares is merely an investment choice. Whether it's an airline today or a company tomorrow, That's an investment choice you or your broker or any individual makes, because that's not the return that you want, or you don't want to take the risk that is going with it. And there would be others who will say, I'm going to buy low because these airlines, like some of the major ones in the world, will recover. And when they do, I'll make some money on it. So that's an investment matter. So the reason we're giving consideration to SAA, I'll come back to in a moment. And she raises questions about a 5-month process for a new airline. But that's what business rescue is about. So if we read the legislation, it says very clearly that if a business is rescuable when it is in financial distress, the product, firstly, must be a business rescue plan, but the plan must be about the new entity that emerges that is more viable and certainly not distressed as the old entity that the business rescue practitioners were asked to actually deal with. Mr. Kachalia's point on the private sector, absolutely. The private sector is involved in providing many services to airlines and aviation more generally. And as a government, we've said very clearly that we look forward to the participation of a strategic equity partner. So I think it's regrettable, again, that you use the word pick up assets, because we don't want people to pick up assets. We want people to pay a fair price if and when we decide a particular asset is to be put on sale. And just value in the public interest must actually be collected for that. So we're not having a garage sale, I hope, out of this process, where things are taken on the cheap, so to speak, and other people profit from what is public property at this point in time. Honorable Somyo, on aviation strategy, and a very important point, and there is somewhat of an aviation strategy, but both the Minister of Transport and ourselves have agreed that we've got to review that given the new context in which we find ourselves. Honorable Hadebe, you still make a very important point about in terms of Section 150, 51, 52, etc., the necessity for a plan. So, and I want to return to that in a moment. I don't know what you meant when you said do the honorable thing, but perhaps there's a signal that you are sending in this regard. Honorable Lees regrettably has his mind fixated on liquidation from day one, the 18th of February meeting. Why? I don't understand. If he is a public representative interested in the public interest, Chair, then we should be looking for ways, unless it is absolutely impossible, to create a viable entity in the public interest and with private participation to the extent that government policy would allow it or permit it in a particular instance. So liquidation, as far as government is concerned, is not on the books. Because one has to ask the question, who's waiting in the wings to pick up these assets? Has anybody cut a deal with someone in a nefarious fashion so that they are the beneficiaries on the cheap, so to speak, of public assets at this point in time? By way of information on Mango and SART, what we've been told is both Mango and SART are paying 50% salaries at the moment, Chair, like many airlines are doing globally across the board. So it's management and staff. And the question that arises here is if this was done at SAA, even for March and April, we wouldn't be worried about where the May salary is going to come from. That's the only point we're making. Is it a point of difference? Yes, absolutely there is. Because there was a way to ensure that people did get money in their pockets if we had the interest of workers at heart. And regrettably, despite many suggestions in this area, our advice was actually ignored. So let me assure you, Chair, and the members, that Les Mattison has not been appointed my Mbongi. So, as you said, I can speak for myself. And what I do is, as a public servant, in the interest of government policy and government decisions that we've made. Secondly, let me say clearly that the government decision in this regard, as far as business rescue is concerned, is that The processes must be followed as prescribed in the law, and as many members have pointed out, which I will outline in a moment. And the outcome must be that there is a viable business at the end of this process. And we all know that restructuring SAA and preparing it to become a viable business will involve pain and sacrifice. And there are many players who are willing to take the pain and make the sacrifice so that in 2 or 3 years, we do have an entity that is not dependent on the fiscus. The third point is to repeat the point I made earlier on. What is the purpose of business rescue? The purpose, if we wanted liquidation, or if the board wanted liquidation on the 5th of December 2019, that's the decision it could have made then. But the decision, after discussion with the lenders at that point in time, was to go into business rescue. So the job of the business rescue practitioner, notwithstanding the other clause that was quoted, is to make the best effort possible to ensure that there's a viable business at the end of this process, and not be petulant about how we get money and when, in what order we actually get money. So once you decide that the business is rescuable, then the commitment must be to emerge with a credible plan which actually takes us in this direction. So Honorable Hadebe, amongst others, have studied the Act very well. So let's look at what the Act says. It says 25 days. All right, you can have an extension or 2. But Chair, we did some counting here. It's 25 days versus 162 days. How do we justify taking 5.5 billion rands and spreading it over 162 days and not having a credible business plan for a viable business to emerge? The second, the point arising from that is the money question. And I want to make that very clear also to Honorable Lees as well. We need a plan which says very clearly, not that so-called restructuring cost. So the restructuring cost exploded from the 3rd of January to the 17th of February, just in respect of operational funding, from 2.4 billion rands to 5.5 billion rands. That's more than twice, 2.5 times what the original cost was. But we didn't hire, or the business rescue practitioners were not put in place to run an airline. They were put in place to emerge with a plan so that competent managers are appointed to run the airline. It is not their job. They say they don't have aviation experience. And if they don't have aviation experience, why do you want to run the airline for 162 days? Is a question that I think in the public interest we have to ask. So in our view, Chair, the post-commencement finance should have been stretched as much as possible. You do nobody a favor by saying it was supposed to be finished by February, but we stretched it to March. That's part of your job. Because cost cutting is part of the job. It says so in the Act. And make sure that any pressures that there are from inordinate contracts, Chair, including the return of aircraft, are actually set aside. And we still today don't know what is going on in that particular regard as well. The related point is the flow of information. You've pointed that out. And we're having a similar engagement with one of the consultants, accounting firm PwC, that the BRP is hired, who were paid 30-odd million rands for a financial model. And we're asking ourselves, did we get value for money? So we haven't completed that engagement yet, Chair. So in conclusion, let me say that it is quite astounding that after all the interactions we've had today, Mr. Dongwana still says to you as a committee, says to the South African public, despite what the Act says about their responsibilities, that the business rescue plan will be done for a wind down. I think that's shocking. Instead of saying we will do a business rescue plan that presents 2 or 3 options on which we will consult the relevant players, which the Act requires us to do, and then decide what's the optimal option, And then we will be, as government, in a position to say we can support X or not support Y financially. Then make your choices. But here there is a determination to produce a business rescue plan for a wind down without presenting options to us. And I think as a public entity and a public forum, there's some additional accountability that is required. So wind down means, in simple terms, honorable members and ladies and gentlemen, that they will incrementally dispose of assets so that creditors and others get what they want to get, but at the end of which you have nothing as an airline. You don't achieve your key mission in terms of the Companies Act, that out of a business rescue process must emerge a viable business. And that's a questionable set of judgments. We will not accept liquidation as an option because we don't know who's waiting in the wings, as I said earlier on. And it is their responsibility, with the money that has been spent, to emerge with a credible plan that presents us with options. And the outcome must be a viable business that is fair to creditors, fair to employees, fair to public, and importantly, Chair, we only talked about SAA today, but the aviation industry as a whole is in difficulty in South Africa. Whether it's AXA because they're collecting no money, ATNS, they're collecting no money, and other airlines that have publicly declared where they stand. So it's not for me to cover that. So give us a plan which says this is the kind of money that is required, and this is the kind of vision we have, debate it with the important stakeholders as quickly as possible, and have a viable way forward to a viable business emerging out of this process, which is in line with the requirements of the Companies Act. So I must thank you, Chair, for your patience, and thank the honourable members for their questions and comments. And I hope that in further dialogue with the business rescue practitioners, we can arrive at some consensus as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you,
Minister. I think on the issue of honourable list, just like I did with you, Minister, when you speak about fixations and then hinge it on who's in the wings, let us take what he says as purely MP who's got probably a different ideological outlook and party position, which he must interpret, which he must articulate, which is not personal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I think let me conclude by saying the following. An unhealthy working relationship between the business rescue practitioners and government is not in the interests of this airline or what is the endeavor. Because seated here, listening to the business rescue practitioners, listening to the minister, we are singing from two different hymn sheets. And that's why earlier on I said there must be a meeting of minds to tie this down to a logical and sustainable outlook. Otherwise, the chaos of the musical chairs continues. And I want to say, 15 million rands each over 4 months for the business rescue practitioners does not sit well with me. This operation is not a money-making scheme. And it could be more if you then tally up the consultants and other work. SAA is already bleeding money, bled money, has no money out of it. The fiscus is strained beyond all measure. The taxpayer cannot afford to continuously have to pay for something which has got no end in sight. So I want to make one amendment. In the report of the 26th of May, that will be submitted to us. In that report, we want a date and a timeline and deadlines insofar as when this matter will be concluded, so that we can speak from certainty. Because if we continue on this trajectory of speculation, we are adding fuel to the fire. The bottom line is either you shape up or you ship out. But we cannot be on this unending genesis of exodus rather, of planning and not completing things. No. So we do first things first, clean your house, shape up or ship out. But the taxpayer whom we as COPA represent has had it up to here. And I'm sure I speak for all South Africans without running the risk of being asked which South Africans. All South Africans cannot afford an airline which is going to bleed South Africa further. Let's bring this down to something which works. So colleagues, thank you very much for your patience. And I know it's a Friday afternoon, but that is the call of duty. And we have stepped over well the time to parliamentary staff, to our support staff, Minister in your delegation, the business rescue practitioners, and the department, DG, and your administrative staff in the department. Colleagues, thank you very much. And to everyone, let's continue to observe the rules and regulations of the lockdown. Let's all remain safe. Let's all do the right thing. And we'll communicate further. On SA Express, a Deputy Minister will engage further on all those matters so that we can be able to bring about a level of certainty for the economy, for the workers, and for the taxpayer. On that note, thank you very much. A blessed weekend and a blessed weekend. And from me and your families, take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend.
Bye-bye, Chair.
Enjoy Somyo. Somyo, you have a very big cup you are drinking out of.
Sharp.
Hey, you, that is a big cup. I wish I could have a big glass like that.
You'll have it. I'm looking at the beret, by the chairperson's beret.
The chair is ready to go to war.
Yeah, I said to go to war. Look at this beret. Very.